Welcome to the FATED Connections Path of Exile Community Podcast, episode number 72. We're about 1 month into the 3.17 expansion, and today we're not only joined by our regular BalorMage, but also the special guests Octavian and Tenkiei. And here is your host, CatmasterOP.
Hi guys! Welcome everyone. I came down with a throat infection, and that's why I thought it would be funny to utilize the voice in a different way this time. I hope no one was thrown off by that. And in order to give our guests a little bit of time to come up to temperature and acclimatize to our podcast, I'm going to ask the most important question that I will ask. Balor, what have you been up to recently?
Super juiced MF mapping because it's just really, really fun. So, like proper high endgame promenades, high rolled delirium orbs on them on just a full quantity character that barely has just enough damage to clear those sort of maps. Like purpose built for the exact amount of damage I need for that and nothing else. That's been really fun and makes way too much money. Also, patient cards are OP, by the way. Like, we should not be farming doctors and nurses. They're ridiculous. We just farm patient cards forever.
What map have you been doing?
Promenade. I get like 3 patient cards a map.
What?
Yeah. Just consistently for days now. It's like 3 patient cards a map on average. I've gotten 7 a few times. Not quite a full stack yet any time. But I'm waiting for that one juice map that has all 8 for me, but it's about 3 every map. It's great.
How many patients do you need for a headhunter? You need 8 patients for a nurse and 8 nurses for
64 gets you a doctor,
and then 8 times 64 basically. So 512.
Yep, 512.
That is less than 200 maps then.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds pretty good.
It's a lot of money. Spoiler alert, the patch notes for next league will say patient drop rate has been lowered by, I don't know, about 5%.
Will it? I feel like
I doubt they'll say that.
Yeah, I see that. I see your point that it will be lowered, but I feel like they're never explicit about drop rates for things.
No, you're right. It won't actually be in the patch notes, but that will happen next league.
There will just be Reddit posts like 1 week into the league. It's like, guys, has the drop location been changed? Because I haven't gotten any yet.
And we're like, I ran 4 maps and didn't get a patient. What's wrong?
But yeah, what have you been up to, Octavian? Any divination card farmings yourself?
Not that in particular, no. I've been struggling with poor internet for a long time because I had Comcast in the area, and Comcast will take your money and then not provide the service that they say they'll provide on paper and give you a significantly worse service, or at least that's what they've done with me in multiple locations in the country. I am anti-sponsoring Comcast. I absolutely despise them. But yeah, I've finally been able to swap off of Comcast onto a more local ISP, and we are paying $30 less per month for literally 10 times the speed. So as a result of that, I've swapped back to playing hardcore, because previously, I think at League Start this league, I lost something like 2 or 3 characters to internet problems, and over the last half dozen leagues or so, I've lost many more than that. You know, I had a Slayer that I'm still sad about 2 leagues later that died at level 99 and like 70% to a disconnect in the middle of doing a Alva mission. So yeah, I'm back in hardcore. I just swapped back over a little less than a week ago, and I've been progressing through the Atlas, and I just got all the new bosses done in hardcore.
Sounds cool. Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into the build in just a moment. Tenkiei, how about yourself?
Well, I was also struggling with some computer issues at the start of a league, so I ended up resolving those by upgrading my computer. Since then, I found out that playing with what felt like 200 milliseconds of constant latency kind of sucks. Feels a lot better to play Path of Exile without that. Since then, I have worked on polishing up the Righteous Fire build I was playing and diving into trying some logbooks, because in Expedition, it was the best content I'd seen in a long time. They're still good. They're still profitable. They're still fun.
Yeah, expeditions are pretty good. I didn't do any because they slow me down so much, and with the new patch, something we want to get into later, but I'll just mention it here right now. It's with the new patch, you kind of want to complete the maps as fast as possible. And I'm sure when you say farming expedition, you mean like buying logbooks and buying the stuff, not actually like running the maps and doing the expeditions in the maps.
Oh, no, I was running the maps. I was using gilded expedition scarabs.
Oh, okay. I mean, I guess if your goal is generating currency, for myself, it feels, with the enormously juiced maps, it feels so counterproductive if you want to progress to the new bosses, because those are based on the map completion. But I'm sure we'll get into that in a second. I'll just say that I've been playing RF Inquisitor as well. It's been a fun league start, and I've played it to past level 90 twice and died twice to like weird... Oh, actually, no. The first time I died, I wasn't past level 90. It was the first time I got into maps. I was like rank 103 overall or something like that, and died to a silly Archnemesis thing that instantly killed me, and I still don't know why exactly, but I think it was just very fast and attacked me in quick succession, and I didn't have enough fizz mitigation up. And then the second time I died to this malevolence thing. I'm sure you've heard of the thing that applies 50% more damage taken to you. And yeah, since then I've been kind of burned on the entire elite mechanic, even though I should be engaging with it more in SSF. I just felt like it's not worth it for me, and I wanted to get a character going. And then most recently I died to Behemoth, spawning in a very dense map that was dark. I think it was a grotto map, so I couldn't really see anything in the middle of the breach. And then all of a sudden I heard the DD sound, and I was like, oh shit. I tried to run away still, but it caught me totally off guard. And now I'm I don't want to do the same build more than 3 times in a row, so I decided I have a little bit of gear. I found a Shavs earlier on. Actually found 4 Shavs this league already. Not in this league, but I found 3 Shavs while practicing the bosses in Perma Softcore. Actually, a double Shavs drop from doubling unique drops from the altars. Kind of silly. But the Archnemesis stuff that I mentioned is actually the first topic I want to get into. How have you guys been finding Archnemesis, and how much do you engage with it in your everyday play?
I quickly dropped the mechanic after about a week or a little more into the league initially, and then I went back to it to do some challenges and get some of the big recipes, and I actually did have a really good time initially building up to like the big combo of Innocence plus Aberrath plus whatever else, where you get all currency and it's rolled 3 additional times and you get a whole ton of it from Treant Horde and all that. And then after I completed that once, I just got this overwhelming feeling that I never wanted to do that again. Like even though, and I didn't even get bad drops. I got 2 straight exalts, like 20 chaos, a bunch of other little currencies. It was pretty damn good returns for the single fight. It was a big loot explosion, basically. It set off the dopamine. But then I just really never wanted to mess with the organization again. So when the loot filters broke a couple days ago with the most recent patch, I took that as an opportunity to go and edit a new loot filter and take everything except for like 3 recipes and make them really tiny. And now I don't have to sort anything in my stash anymore because I only have like 3 recipes that I do. So I don't have to it doesn't take a lot of visual sorting or anything to try and figure out which pieces I have or what I need. I can recognize it all at a glance. I just do those recipes, and that's all I do. Half of the maps I'm in, I'm not doing Archnemesis because I'm just building up materials. When my stash gets full, I do Archnemesis for a half dozen maps, rinse, repeat. That's it.
Yeah, I've also found it to be one of the most skippable league mechanics in a long time, because I had the same experience with Innocence Touched, where it took me a really long time to build it up. And yeah, I got 2 exalts. But if we're talking about a 50 to 100 map build-up, you need way more than 2 exalts, because you can just set your loot filter up for a mediocre recipe. hide pretty much everything else, and get consistent returns that aren't that much worse.
Mm-hmm. I believe it was day 2 of a league. When that first recipe got shown to us, the one that's not really a recipe, but the Treant mirror image assassin rejuvenator thing. It's not like really a recipe, but it's like how you get like decent drops. That came out day 2 of the league. I edited my filters to literally show only exactly that combination and just minimized the shit out of everything else. I haven't been doing anything since. That being said, from a reward standpoint, if you were willing to do it, I actually think it's kind of nailed. It's in a really good spot of like, if you're mediumly good at the game and doing medium content, it's still pretty rewarding to engage with that as long as you've got a tight enough filter. But at the level of juice that I'm doing right now, it is ignorable and would be a waste of time, but it should be. Like if I'm doing my Delirium to tier 16 MFing maps, if that can keep up and be worth my time, that would be busted. Like it shouldn't keep up with me in those maps, and it doesn't. So I kind of think they nailed reward level for it, to be honest. It's too much of a pain in the ass to deal with.
Exactly. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Problem.
It's just... Yeah. I want to like this mechanic. It's cool. It's got a lot of... I like the idea of toying with different recipes and trying to come up with a combo that works really well. I like the fact that from a hardcore perspective, the risks are mostly well communicated. There's a few things like malediction causing you to have such a massive debuff when all it says on the text is like weakens you or something like that. It's like, I don't know, it's maybe not giving you the full idea of exactly how dangerous it is. But once you know those things, malediction causes you to take 50% or 40% increased damage. It's like a really fucking dangerous shock, basically.
It should be deal 10 or deal 50% less, take 50% increased, because it's exactly the same effect as malediction as in the occultist node.
Yeah, except that's 10%.
Yeah.
Our malediction is... I just assumed it was 10.
I just assumed
it was malediction.
Effects on enemies are usually multiplied 5-fold, just like with charges.
I was doing it occasionally when because at League Start itself, I played in hardcore Self-Found for a bit, and then I swapped back to softcore trade because my internet problems, and now I'm back to hardcore trade. So I've League Started like 3 times, but at League Start itself, I was doing some maledictions while I was leveling, and my chat was like, "Don't do that. It's a bad idea. Read the debuff." So thankfully, Twitch chat proved themselves quite useful, and I have since skipped that one because I mean it's also weird that it's just like I think it's a single, or is it 2 div card rewards? Like it's just strictly not worth that level of risk.
I think it's part of a recipe, though, right?
Yes, yeah. It is. I forget which one, but it definitely is part of a recipe.
Can't be a good one then.
So I'm probably going to need to do it at some point if I want to get 38 or 40 challenges. But for now, like I said, that recipe that you mentioned with Treant Horde and Assassin and Mirror Image and whatever else is the one that I've set up my filter for, and that's the only one I do.
It's worth noting, 2 days ago, I added one more to the filter because it's almost exactly the same recipe. There's a temporal bubble combo. I think Firegrass put it out in a video a little bit ago. And I was like, that's really cool. And then I looked at it and 3 of the 4 components were exactly the same. And the one component that was different was one that I was always bottlenecked on anyway. So I added in a few extra bases, and now I've got 2 that are mostly the same and just have a different starting point. And then that works much better.
Something else that I like doing is a very similar setup, but swapping out Rejuvenating for Necromancer and potentially swapping out Mirror Image for Soul Eater, because rerolled maps give you a lot of Conqueror maps and a lot of Delirious maps.
See, it's such an interesting mechanic. I wish it was just easier to use. I just wish it was easier to use, man.
Yeah, and the UI, I think it made it worse.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I don't use the highlight function very much because I didn't really like it. But I mean, you can always just ignore it. So baseline, it's not. I don't know if it's worse, but yeah, I don't think the changes were all that effective.
The reason
Yeah,
I
it
find
must-
it worse,
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I
I'd be
want to
curious
ignore
to
it.
hear.
and it turns itself on, and then I have to close it out repeatedly.
It feels like the idea of limiting us the space in my inventory and just starting from there was the problem. That's the whole problem with the whole thing. You know, there's only so many monsters, right? And then my thought that I had the other day was, what if it just didn't have individual monster bits? What if it was just one big panel that just had all of the monsters that could be there, and then like a number as I collected them? And if you've got 12 of these, or you've got 22 of these, or you've got 42 of those, and you could just remember locations of where they were and be like, I've got that set that I want. And then there just wasn't a number, and there wasn't any of the screwing around trying to figure out what's worth picking up and what's not. You would just eventually have the stuff you want, and you wouldn't have to deal with any of the other stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of a good point, and there's not much reason for them to actually be an item that sits in an inventory that you can move around if they're not tradable. Not that I'm saying they ought to be tradable. I don't think they should be. I like that you don't feel like there's some opportunity cost to not using it or selling it or whatever. But you can also get rid of the whole system of itemization in favor of a more streamlined menu if it's not something that you are like. You can't even drop it on the ground. It just tells you to destroy it. There is no actual impact to it being an item instead of just a stat in a menu.
I haven't made a big deal about complaining about it, but it's been bothering me since before the league even started that we have to click them to begin with. And I know, like the whole community isn't really upset about it, and so I haven't bothered to complain a lot about it. But like it's been annoying me because we established a precedent. If it goes into my own separate inventory or my own separate area, it's untradeable, it's not droppable, then it's automatic pickup. If it's an item that goes into my inventory, I have to click it. That's the precedent. We made that precedent. We've changed things in the past to meet that. When we did Metamorph, people were like, we're not clicking this bullshit. This isn't tradable stuff. This isn't real things. And they were like, yeah, you're right. And then they did it again. And I have to click them all. And I guess you have to have it that way because of the limited inventory space, because I'm getting like 22 organs a map on average. Like Jesus. I couldn't.
It feels like Chris, I don't like to call out particular developers. I don't think it's Chris's fault because like he doesn't, develop the minute details of the game like that. But he did mention on the podcast that you'd be picking up like one or two. I think it was with Ziggy's Q&A, not a podcast. Yeah. The same difference. And it's just like I feel like they constantly underestimate the amount of juice that players on the top end are going to be pulling out of their maps.
It's even on day 2, it was still 7 or 8 per map.
I mean, yeah. I don't do juice content like that because it would kill me and I don't want to die. But I'll alk and go on most maps and I get 4 or 5. But 4 or 5 is still somewhat reasonable, but then you get up to like another 20 or 30 clicks per map at the tier of content you're doing, and that gets a little absurd.
I think for me, the problem isn't even the number. The problem is the annoyance of not being able to sort from the inventory. There are so many recipes that I just do not do because I have half the parts that look icon-wise exactly the same as half the parts of another recipe. So I just assume that they're part of the other recipe. And I can't put them aside and separate them because the new stuff will just be put right next to it. And so then I lose them and it becomes a giant mess. And what I really want, if you're going to make a UI for this, make it so that when you click to go after a recipe, it hides on your loot filter everything that is not part of that recipe. Just let me target recipes if you're not going to let me sort things.
Yeah, or make the tab something like, that wouldn't work with the limited inventory space, but I feel like the sorting function on the new gem tab and flask tab is really, really good. where you can sort by quality or by level, by gem level, like the level at which the gem becomes available, the level the gem actually, the physical gem in the tab has, and the quality. And if you were able to have like different groupings and like actually have them grouped layout wise, not just highlighting in the 5x5 tab, but actual like grouping so that they're the same organs are put together in a group. I don't know. I think that would be better. But I don't know.
Basically, everyone I talk to has the same opinion that all of us seem to be, which is like, it's a really kind of cool mechanic that we wish we could use more, but it's just such a pain in the ass to use that I don't really want to. It's like, if it was just better and smoother and easier, we'd all be excited to use it all the time. But it's just so awkward and weird.
Is there a level of reward, though? Sorry, please. Is there?
No, it's okay.
Okay, I'll ask the question quickly. Is there a level of reward that would make it, that would justify it for you to interact with it despite your frustrations you have with the system? Or
I don't think that that's a very good way to go about trying to optimize the system or trying to make something desirable to players. Because in a game like Path of Exile, where the players who are devoting more time to it are devoting something on the hours of on the order of hundreds and hundreds of hours to it in the course of a given league, any little friction between you and the game is going to add up over time to be something that just really puts a sour taste in your mouth. I mean, you can look at Heist as an example to that, where
Harvest.
You've got, people absolutely despising the mechanic because you wait for a door to open. And, if you ask someone, do you hate waiting for a door to open? Most of the time, in most contexts, that wouldn't really be too bad a thing to have to do, waiting 4 or 5 seconds for a door. But when you do it hundreds and hundreds of times over and over and over again, it doesn't matter if the rewards are good. Eventually, you start to goddamn hate it. Like, they've pumped really good rewards into Heist in the past, and it's still a mechanic that gets some of the most ire from the PoE community out of anything. You need to make the ease of use of whatever league mechanic like the top priority before even rewards. I actually think it's more important that something is fun and enjoyable to interact with than that it's rewarding, because rewarding this is a game that wipes over and over again every 3 months. The rewards are not the thing that matters in the long term. The enjoyment of the mechanic and how fun it is to actually interact with is what matters.
I would say I absolutely agree with that. I mean, that's why I threw Harvest in there, because what you just said about Heist is the exact same thing about Harvest, where Harvest in the past was a lot stronger than it is now in terms of the rewards that it grants. But even then, I hated interacting with it, even though it was worth my time, and I did it all the time because of fear of missing out. Like, that Harvest could have that augment craft or that null craft that back then still existed, but I just never liked it past one league because it's just not fun to interact with. Although I think that was a point that you raised, actually, Octavian, a lot of times back when Harvest got implemented into core, and then right the league afterwards where they changed it, where they gutted it so hard. I think it was actually more fun to interact with in its original implementation and when it first went core, because then you actually had some sort of insight into risk reward, and now you don't really know what monsters it spawns, and that especially in hardcore can be very frustrating.
That is something that has bothered me for a little while, yes. The feeling when you go and pop open a patch of seeds in hardcore and suddenly there's 5 bears that have like crit and fizz auras, and you either insta-kill them or get the hell out of there is not great. Not because I think that, the harvest mobs need to be nerfed in some way, but because if I'm going into a really, really dangerous threat like that, I don't want it to look exactly like another harvest patch that has maybe 1 bear. Because you can see the names of the monsters that are going to give you rewards, but not every monster in the patch gives you a reward. And you can learn the art of the seeds to know what tiers of monsters are in the patch, but any tier 2 seed monster is going to look the same as any other. So it could be a bear, or it could be the other tier 2 seed monsters, and you don't know. So you can get a vague assessment of risk by like, oh, there's a lot of tier 2 seeds in there. Maybe there'll be a lot of bears, but you don't actually know.
Yeah, that plus the fact that if I actually have to fight 4 Blister Lords at the same time, and then I don't get any crafts that change influence, that's kind of frustrating.
I think the problem that Harvest suffers from in this regard is the same that a lot of other League mechanics do, where they start out maybe a little overly complicated, and it frustrates the player base. So GGG simplifies it. I maybe simpled my statement a little too much there. The problem is, in simplifying it, there's value lost, because they don't redesign it. They just cut pieces out. And I think it goes to show that right now, Archnemesis is not in a great spot. It probably does need some of that simplification, but it needs to be done with a rework like we saw for Bestiary, rather than just cutting pieces out like we've seen for a lot of subsequent League mechanics.
Even just simply doubling my inventory space would make it at least manageable.
I suspect if your inventory space is doubled, you will just collect more junk and run into the same problem.
You're right. It'll just get full of shit again. You're right. It doesn't matter. That wouldn't help.
A second page would be nice, because then you could put like one of the problems is when you pick up new pieces, they just go into the same pile as the things that you tried to sort. You know, it's like if I had a pantry with no shelves. It was just a pantry, and it's just the floor in the closet.
Everything stacked.
And I just, yeah, exactly. Like if I want to sort it, I can maybe make it like a little pile over here and a pile over there and stuff, but I can't meaningfully separate things from one another by any sort of like large degree. And if I get a whole bunch of junk in from the grocery shopping, it's just going to all go on top. If I had a second page, then I could put the things I want to use later over there, and the new garbage pieces could come in on the first page, and they could stay separate.
Yeah, so maybe a second page that only combined recipes can go to, or maybe only things that you put there.
So you're
exactly.
Suggesting affinities for the Archnemesis tab.
Not even that necessarily. Just like what Tenkiei just said, a second page that things don't go into unless you put them there. So you can keep a pile of things separate.
I said this last podcast as well, and like 50 times a week on stream. This is the first time we've had a League mechanic where I wish they did less. Because if they just did the thing that they always do, which normally annoys us, which is just have them go into my inventory and have me take up inventory space and put them in my stash. If they just did that, we would right now all be using a tool that scraped the stash tabs that we own and just told us when we had the recipes we picked out that we wanted to do, and then we would tick a button that says, yes, I'd like to do that recipe next map, and it would say, go to this tab, pick up that one, and that one, bring them into the map in that order. And I just wouldn't have to deal with any of it anymore. If they did less, it would be a better league. This is the first time I've wanted it in my stash, because someone would have written a tool that would have dealt with all the bullshit I don't want to deal with, and then I'd be using it all the time.
I agree with wanting the quality of life that would provide, but I really dislike the dependence on third-party tools in that regard. Again, with the parallel to Harvest, I think with the original implementation of Harvest League and the Hordy crafting stations, that was really like a big unfun aspect for me, was you can just spam infinite Hordy crafting stations and have like an entire tab full of them that had all the crafts, and you could just index it, and it just... I don't know.
That was the best.
I know
that was the best part.
I like the options that, like the quality of life that it gave, but I don't like that it becomes the new baseline expectation for players to have that installed and to interact on the TFT, because otherwise they're missing out. feel like in the future, and I do appreciate the sort of community that PoE is fostering by allowing third-party tools to remain relevant for a long time. But I hope that in the future we're moving away a little bit from the dependence on third-party tools rather than moving towards it.
See, so you mentioned TFT like it's a bad thing, but realistically, that's existed since the late 90s in every game online that you've ever played. What all TFT is forum trading. What was the Diablo 2 one? There was a one that everyone used in the world.
D2JSP.
That's the one, D2JSP. It's literally the same thing. TFT is no different than it ever has been, than forum trading has ever been. Here's the difference. On TFT, instead of normal forum trading, it is quicker, it is more organized, and there's a vouch system making it so that I feel comfortable handing 200x items to perfect strangers. Other than that, it's literally just forum trading. It's the same thing we've had since like mid-90s whenever we started using forum trading. It's just quicker and more efficient. And there are people that complain about it like TFT's a bad thing. I don't get it. You're literally not thinking like it's the same thing we've been using for 25 years in online video games, just more efficient and a trust system that you can actually trust so you don't get scammed. That's it.
I'm not saying it's bad. I like the benefit that it provides, and I appreciate the work that people put into it to make it as good a system as it is. But I played softcore trade last league, I know, and I did trade for some harvest crafts, and I just didn't like the added time of tabbing out of the game and doing things outside of the game in order to progress within the game. But that might just be me, right? Like there was a time where I really enjoyed having a lot of third-party applications and tabbing out of the game constantly, even when I just had one screen. I just started playing the game. I enjoyed reading the wiki. I enjoyed going to PoE Trade. I just don't want to have more of that in the future. No. And maybe it's also my development as a player, moving to SSF, not wanting to trade and stuff like that.
That could definitely be part of it. But I think there's a middle ground, which, if we're going a little bit outside of Path of Exile for a moment, into the broader gaming and game design sphere, there's a very big kind of gulf between game developers and people who make third-party tools for games. And the way I see to solve this issue, that kind of incorporates some of the idea of it's great that the community develops a tool, but also not having to rely on that tool for too long, would be, what if, when there's a really good community tool that GGG says, okay, we didn't intend this, we didn't design this, but we're okay with it. Why not integrate that into the game officially in some aspect? That way it's not outside of, it's not third party. Works kind of...
Please finish.
It worked kind of like the loot filter system, which started as a third-party thing and has since become core to the game.
I've always wanted them to do something, what you just said, like implement it to the game. When they did the weather mechanics on the Atlas, Tempest and Warbands, and the community wrote a tool so you could keep track of which map has which Warband or which Tempest in which hour, I thought that was really cool, and I always wished for these weather dynamics on the Atlas to reappear in some shape or form in the game, and that you'd actually visually see them on the Atlas. I like the Atlas changing over time a little bit, being a little bit more dynamic. I really enjoyed the Elder and Shaper influence, even though that was clearly not used by the community in the way that GGG intended, and that it was also good to get scrapped eventually, but the general idea of things moving around on the Atlas and you being able to see that in-game on the Atlas overview, I really like that. Hope that we'll get something like Tempest and Warbands in the future. A revisit of that league mechanic. And with how GGG has been revisiting old league mechanics, I mean, Scourge is basically a sort of Beyond 2.0, right? And this league now is sort of Metamorph 2.0. I'm almost sure that eventually in the next 2 or 3 years we'll get something like
all right. Can I ask a question that I don't understand? So something I don't understand. So there's a lot third-party tools like as a problem comes up a lot, and I don't understand it. And the reason I don't understand it is because we've been using either third-party tools or officially supported mods in every game for as long as I can remember. When I was playing World of Warcraft, even in Burning Crusade, I had like 75 mods installed, and the game was practically unplayable without having at least 10 or 20 of them. The only difference being there was a one collective store, like I think it was called the Curse client or something, where you could just like pick every mod, and we don't have one collective thing to install that has a list of all the third-party tools we could use that you could just select from, which, by the way, someone should make. But like that's, to me, the only difference between what we've always done in every game forever and what we're doing in PoE is that we don't have one collective area to select all of the add-ons that we want. Like that's the only difference between what we're doing in PoE and what we've always done in every online game forever. And I don't understand why everyone's so anti-third-party tool, like it's a problem.
I
think
it's a mismatch of communities, that there's the group of players who, especially SSF players, and I don't necessarily want to use the word more justifiably, but maybe more understandably so, SSF players really want to focus on the experience when you're in the game. And then
what tool do you need in SSF? Logout? That's it?
Logout macro. Also, there's a lot of little tools that have come up to interact with leak mechanics over the years that have been helpful even in SSF. You definitely want to interact with loot filters via Filter Blade or wherever else. And the chaos recipe tool, for example, would actually probably be more useful for someone in SSF than someone in trade. And I can understand that mindset, but where I see a lot of it come from is people who are coming from a newer generation of game that you don't have to look anything up outside of a game client. And so they're not used to it. And they don't approach PoE with a learning mindset. They don't approach it with the mindset of, I'm going to have to look this thing up on the wiki. They approach it with what you might get if you're playing retail WoW. Well, everything this boss does should be in the dungeon journal, because that's what every game they've played before is like. And I agree that PoE should do more to integrate certain things into the game. But I don't see it as a bad thing that you have to look at a wiki page, or that you have to tab out to trade, or any of these things, or that these tools exist. It's a good thing because it adds functionality which the developers probably, in all honesty, would not have even thought of to add, because they're not the people that are the 200,000 monkeys on typewriters. They're the 200 monkeys on typewriters.
Yeah, it's literally like the only thing I want is something akin to the Curse client, where there's just like, hey, here's a link to this one program, and it has every add-on that's, legal and isn't going to get you banned, and isn't like, those things get checked, and as long as they're not dodgy programs or anything like that, here's just a full list of all of the options, and you can just be like, I would like these ones, please. Because that's what we did with the Cast client back in the day for WoW, and that moved it from feeling like you needed 20 different programs to feeling like you needed one, because it was just one. And all it did was just install all the different ones you wanted, but you only had to manage that one thing. I think if we had something like that for PoE that just had everything and it just updated from the GitHubs and stuff, just like Curse always did, I think that would solve a lot of people's upset, because you'd be managing one thing all the time. It'd be just the one thing. And I don't know, I feel like that would, if there was just one thing to install, people would be significantly less worried about it.
It's not so much about the setup, but about the time spent. I really want to move away from this topic, as we haven't scheduled this one out, and I think we've presented a lot of viewpoints. So I'll give Octavian the last word on this.
Oh, I was just gonna say that I'm surprised by the extent of tools that people are using. I don't know. I am maybe just an old dog who's refusing to learn new tricks, but I have never really used any sort of macro for the game. I just tab out and search things manually.
Same.
I don't know. I'm too. It's this is gonna sound weird, but I'm too lazy to use a macro, which I know makes no objective sense at all because a macro saves you time. Yeah. But every time I go to like price an item, I'm just like, I'll just tab out and price it on the site. I'll just tab out, and I just do that every single time, and I never get around to installing the macro, and I never care.
By the time you've typed in one mod on your item, I could have looked up the entire thing on a macro.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure it's good, but like, I don't need it. That's more what I'm saying. Like, I was listening into this conversation and I heard the word "need" a lot, and I just don't. I don't need it. Like, I accomplish everything I want to accomplish in the game without ever using a single one, and maybe it's just because I'm
like, macro.
I don't.
Okay, so you also don't have fast travel macros set up. So when you log into town, you can't go to your hideout by just pressing a button. You have to walk to the waypoint and click your hideout.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I couldn't play like that anymore. I couldn't go back to that.
I'm not dead. I'm fine. You know?
That sounds horrible.
Path of Exile is a pretty damn playable game in my experience. I don't know. Maybe it's, again, just old dog set in his ways.
I might be the same, but to expand on that a little, part of the reason I don't use most of the tools is they do things that I don't want, and I don't want to have those buttons there. That if I want to price check an item, I don't want to also have a button on my keyboard that randomly logs me out, or that does all these other things. And until I can find one that is fully customizable, I'm just not going to use them, because I'm too lazy to learn the scripting to do it myself in AutoHotkey.
The answer is PoE Trade Companion.
That's the other thing. That's the other thing. It changes every fucking 6 months or something. And like, so like 3 or 4 leagues ago, it was Awakened PoE Trade. And before that, it was PoE Macro. And before that, I'm sure there was something else. And I just don't want to keep up with it. I just want to launch Path of Exile and play Path of Exile. I don't want to launch Path of Exile and launch this macro and that tool and that tool. No, I'm just going to play the game. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's exactly my viewpoint, but I don't have a problem setting things up that make my life easier. I just have a problem with spending time outside of the game while I'm trying to play the game to progress. Like I don't want to like
old man argument. I mean, yes.
Yeah, probably the same for me. Like, I'm also set in my ways. Like, there's a certain way how I play the game, how I have my macros set up, how I have my keys set up for going delve, going to hideout, going to the menagerie and stuff like that. And I just wouldn't want to miss that. But yeah, it's we talked about Archnemesis a lot. We're all fine with it going core, or like we mentioned a couple of things that we would like to see improved. But I'm sure we all agree that if it went core like the way that it currently is, it would be too big, right? It would be too big as a 10% occurrence mechanic. Or would that make it better because you get fewer organs and they're easier to manage?
By too big, do you mean too rewarding?
No, too big in the sense of too deep, too complicated, or a small mechanic that's not the main theme of the league. Like with many mechanics, they require more time investment and more thinking while they're the league, and when they get implemented into core, they get simplified a little. Like we mentioned, Einhar, for example.
I don't really have strong opinions on it going core. If it went core unchanged, I'd probably do it very little. I'd get one thing that I like, and I'd put that on my filter, and I'd ignore the rest. And if it gets changes, it's probably going to be simplified in some way, and hopefully it's a good simplification.
They should, if they have it go core, they should just make it so that like 3 or 4 Archnemesis dudes spawn in a zone, and there's one random recipe, and you choose which of the monsters you want to fight with that randomized recipe. And then sometimes it fucks you, basically. Sometimes it spawns in with Trickster, Invulnerable, Aberrath touched, and I don't know, Temporal Bubble, and you just can't even touch it.
I mean,
Basically,
that's
want the
very
equivalent
PoE,
of
though.
rogue metamorphs.
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
is very PoE. Like, you pick one,
I mean, you
and
don't
sometimes just get fucked.
You don't have to fight it.
Yep.
And it would also cut down all of the management, and it would get rid of the problem of, like, if it only has a 10% spawn rate, you never do Innocence Touched. You said earlier that it took you like 100 maps to reach that completion. Like, with a 10% spawn rate? No, it just doesn't happen. You don't get the big fancy recipe.
Later.
So, you know, if you haven't randomized recipes, you might occasionally get the big fancy recipe. It does take away some of the player agency.
But let's be honest, even if it's the rippiest thing with Invulnerable, Trickster, Temporal Bubble, and whatever else it was, Exiles will click that.
Yep. I'll click it. I'll just click whichever one gives me the most rewards without ever reading what the downside is. Welcome to softcore. I'm not afraid to throw my body at it 4 times to get it killed. It's fine.
Oh no, that's the thing. I'll just design my build to be so overtuned that I still kill it.
Yep.
As long as you kill it before it kills you. Yeah, one thing I would like if it goes core, if I could change one thing, it would be like proper communication of what the monster does. Linking back to the malediction debuff. It would just tell you beforehand what it did, maybe with advanced highlighting, something like that. I just think it's really important these days that we have clear, transparent communication of what the different modifiers, buffs, and debuffs do. Because there's so many of them, and they all spawn in the top left of the screen, and in the heat of the battle, you just can't sacrifice the time, most of the time, to hover it and actually read it. So you only learn about what killed you after the fact that it killed you. And you could have you could have told from the start that it was going to kill you if you knew how it worked.
Yeah, I mean, some of them don't even, like, even if you could read all the debuffs on you, some of them aren't going to show you the problem by looking at the debuffs. They changed it in a recent patch note, but initially vampiric monsters couldn't be leeched from. So if you were playing like some sort of, I don't know, Slayer build in hardcore that relied fairly heavily on leech as a defensive mechanic, you just got screwed. And like, how do you tell? I mean, I guess you tell when your recovery stops working, but the game there's not really great feedback there, is kind of my point. Like, oh no, I'm not leeching from this thing, it isn't very visceral. It's not like an essence monster that has that big nova that you know how to dodge or something like that.
Yeah, and that's also a problem of consistency, because vampiric to me would say it's leeching from me.
Yep.
But the node on the tree that says that you can't be leeched from is bloodless. So I wouldn't associate vampiric and bloodless together.
I mean, it does also leech from you. I wonder if it gets past bloodless. That's one of the annoying things about Archnemesis, is that we've got some mechanics in the game that are like supposed to be hard counters to one another. And a really niche example of that is there's a Guardian Ascendancy node that causes nearby enemies to be unable to gain charges. Power, Frenzy, and Endurance charges. Harmony of Purpose, that's what it's called. And I got the jewels for that on an Inquisitor that I was playing earlier in the league. And overcharged monsters still gain charges when you're near them, even if you have Harmony of Purpose. They just don't care. They gain them anyway.
That sounds like a bug.
I didn't know that, but that definitely doesn't sound like it should be the case.
I don't know if it's a bug or if they're technically not power and frenzy charges. I'm not sure.
Or if they're technically not gaining them or something. Like
same as with that
PoE shit.
With that burning oil debuff that wasn't burning ground.
That got changed.
I'm so glad that got changed.
In answer to the question in chat, vampiric, you used to not be able to leech from vampiric. They did change that. You can now leech from vampiric. But that was how it was initially implemented.
Yeah.
I've actually missed that.
You still can't leech from corrupted essence monsters, right?
Yep. You cannot.
Yeah. That is back in the day,
Very
hardcore
weird.
screwed me over like a lot. I was playing like a Scion with Slayer Overleech, and like that was my main form of defense. Is like, Ellie hit Slayer Overleech Scion, and you're like, oh yeah, I leech like 3k life a second. That is my defenses. And then you just open an Essence Mob and just don't leech anything, and you just die. You're like, wait, what? Because nothing tells you. You just have to learn.
Imagine having to leech to regain 3k HP per second instead of just being an Inquisitor.
I know, right?
This post made by Inquisitor gang.
But yeah, so that basically sums up Archnemesis. A fun little mechanic, a lot of potential, but in its current form, we see a lot of frustrations with it that need to change if it was to go core. But there is also not only frustrating stuff, there's not only the league mechanic, but it's also part of a huge 3.17 expansion that we've all been enjoying very much, as far as I've gathered. And there's a lot of things to love, honestly. And I think before we talk about the things that I wrote down, I want to ask you, what did GGG do well here? What's some of the highlight or is the outstanding stuff that 3.17 Path of Exile did well?
Everything.
Everything?
It's so good.
If you had to pick one.
If I had to pick one thing, I would pick the visuals for the new bosses. Because the visuals are all very, very clean. The things that are dangerous and deal damage are quite clear, with the potential exception of the mud phase on the Infinite Hunger. And overall, there's a really nice sense of impact behind a lot of the effects. When the Eater of Worlds does his slam, you can really visually see the exact radius where you have to get away. He has the bubble shield thing that he's going to slam you with. It's all really well done.
Yeah, I could agree. I like them thematically and like in terms of visual design very much. They're really cool bosses. And the first time I fought them on the Righteous Fire, I actually didn't have enough damage. It felt like a lot of people have been complaining about their relatively low HP values. I honestly didn't feel that on my couple 100k damage on the Righteous Fire. It's fun fights for the first time around on that build for sure. Balor, have you come up with your one thing, or want me to go?
I'm struggling to pick. Come back to me.
Octavian knows though.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to but praise the bosses a little more outside of Mr. Swampy McGee, as I think they did a really good job with the bosses in particular. But what else is... I mean, the new influence monsters, I really like the altar mechanic. I do think it is somewhat overtuned, and it would not surprise me if it gets hit by the nerf hammer going into next league, in GGG fashion, multiple different ways, both tuning down, maybe the frequency of altars, nerfing some of the nodes on the Atlas tree, tuning down the frequency of the good choices on the altars, things like Scarab choices going to either going away or getting less frequent. But as a concept, I really like the mechanic where you're, empowering your enemies for even more risk, because that's always been a really core fundamental underpinning concept of Path of Exile, where you have, the most basic example of it is just rolling maps. You alch your map, you maybe even corrupt it, you get tons of extra damage mods on the enemies, but you get more stuff out of it. And then league mechanics all over the place do that with like Expedition, Metamorph, and all that. So I like that they're building on a tried and true recipe there. I just wouldn't be surprised if it gets tuned back somewhat.
Yeah, I have a very, very related point. That what I like the most is, and I think that was something that was brought up a lot in the series of podcasts that Chris did during Expedition. I'm specifically, I think, thinking about the one with Tuna, Gazi, and Grim, where a big point brought up was that the fun part of the end game is at the end of the end game instead of where people get into the end game. So a lot of people don't get a taste. And now I think they've done a great job at spreading out the juice throughout the entire mapping landscape. And the moment you get into maps, even without any Atlas nodes, maybe that's subjective for me, or maybe I only talk to people who had a very positive experience, but it just right from the start felt like maps are better than they were before. They spawn more random stuff. You get more stuff in your map. Like a lot of times when in hardcore SSF, I would get into maps, I would be ready to kill Kitava, to do Merciless Lab. I felt like going into maps was not actually as good because early maps weren't really worth to invest a lot into. And as a consequence, they felt like lacking in density. And a lot of times I felt like my time was better spent spamming foothills, for example, to farm specific things when that still was possible. Now I think foothills stop spawning leak mechanics frequently at your character level of 72 or something like that. So it's not good for quite as long. But my point is that it just feels good from the start to get into the Atlas, to get farming maps, and every little map completion gives you another point on the Atlas, which kind of keeps you in this spinning wheel, hamster wheel of just playing the game. There's always like this carrot dangling in front of you of, oh, if I just complete one more map or two more maps, I get this point and that point. And even when you completed a lot of maps, you still get to switch around the Atlas passive tree. And there's so many viable options of the passive tree that maybe that's just because it's been added recently and we still have to find out what are the best options, and it will be condensed down to like 2 or 3 best strats. But right now it just feels like such an epic playground where so many different combinations are worth picking. And yeah, I think they did a really good job at showing the average player that doesn't get to red maps in the time that they play during a league. And everyone who plays a full league probably gets to red maps, unless they hardcore and die or something like that, like me. But yeah, people who didn't get to that super top end level of juiced content now get a sense of what juice feels like early on in the mapping progress. That just feels awesome to me. That's really the most outstanding thing to me.
I think I have to settle on just the Atlas tree as a whole being the best thing in the entire thing, because not only is it super front loaded, like you're like average PoE player or whatever who's got like, 100 points by now instead of 132 that I have, is like most of the way to the power level that I have from their Atlas. It doesn't matter that I'm a degenerate no-life who plays 16 hours a day. I've only got like 20 or 30% at most more power out of my Atlas than your like casual, I play a few days a week after work person. And that bringing those power levels way closer is great. That's great. Fantastic. And then also there's like, I can think off the top of my head of like 8 different strategies I could use with the Atlas. I've respec'd my entire Atlas like, I don't know, 15 times at this point. Like there's so many different things you can do that are rewarding and engaging, and every mechanic on the whole Atlas is profitable, like to varying degrees, but they're all profitable. Like you don't actually have to look up anything. What you can do with the Atlas tree right now is just say, I really like doing this mechanic and this mechanic and this mechanic. They're super fun to me. And then you can just go take those points and it's profitable. And I really like that. Like it's PoE. There's always going to be like, these are the min-maxed strategies. There's always going to be the best. But nothing is bad. There's just good and better. And that's great.
This league, from what I've seen looking over PoE Ninja and what I've heard from like people in my community and watching some other streamers and stuff, seems to be one that has some of the best build variety out of any league that I can think of in recent memory. And I actually think that the point you just made there, where there's a ton of different viable strategies for the end game, really helps with that. Like the league mechanic is somewhat forgettable, and a lot of people are simply skipping over it. So it's not really dictating a certain meta. Like back in Legion League when everybody was playing ED Contagion, because Legion warped the build meta so much that you just opened T2 Glacier maps, killed the Legion, and left. Like we don't have that kind of problem right now, because if you just want to play a build that, specializes in super high single target kill boss, then you can set up your Atlas to ping pong between two maps, get a ton of boss drops, and then go and run a whole bunch of boss fights and not really mind that your clear speed maybe isn't all that high. If you want to do, blitzing tons and tons of monsters, squeeze every monster in the known universe into a single map and MF it and pick up a ton of div cards, you can do that with some tornado shot degeneracy. You have more build variety as a result of there being more variety in endgame strategies, which is really, really excellent knock-on effect of the Atlas tree.
Yeah, I think that the last time we saw this much diversity was Heist, and that was just because there were so many new items and gems that nobody had any idea what to play, and everyone was just trying stuff.
Yep. I kind of think that the only thing I'm worried with this is, well, there's actually two things I'm worried. One thing is that, but that's just natural if you want to make the Atlas passives feel worth picking to interact with a certain mechanic, then it feels kind of lackluster to interact with the mechanic without having the Atlas passives. Like, you kind of don't want to do what Tenkiei did, like spamming expedition scarabs if you don't have the expedition nodes on the tree. Would make no sense, right? It would be a waste of currency and you'd be missing out on stuff. And in the same way, yeah, I probably skip wild expeditions as well because they slow me down so much. And that is the other thing with the high baseline of juice that we have and all the options and the free juice that we get from the tree. I feel that that's something I said in the intro already, and so that's a topic I want to bring up. Is if you want to focus on getting to the new bosses and getting to Maven, it just slows down your progress so much because every map takes so much longer. So you have to kind of decide between, do I want to interact with a lot of mechanics or do I want to get to the bosses fast and efficiently? Because in that case, you just open the map, run into the first pack until the influenced monsters spawn, and you run out again and spam, do the next map. Or maybe in SSF, you do it, you kill it, you do that until you drop your first map, so you keep sustaining your maps.
So this reminds me of one very big complaint I do have about the new system, which is that the 14th and 28th map boss drop the invitation. If your map crashes, you lose that and you have to redo the whole thing. And this happened to me early in the league, and it was incredibly frustrating to lose an entire boss spawn because one map crashed.
I'm sorry. That is painful, yeah.
Yeah.
Be able to talk to Kirak or something.
I think what it should be is it is linked to kill completion, so that if your map crashes, or let's just say you opened it, but you decided, I don't want this to drop yet for whatever reason, I'm just not going to kill the boss, it just doesn't drop and it sits at the same level of progress.
But that would require you to kill the boss for every step.
For every invitation.
Boss. Yeah.
Yeah. That
okay, just for the 14th and 28th, you have to kill the boss for that step to go further.
Yeah, because that's what drops the invitation anyway.
Quick interjected question. There was this interaction where the chance to get double progress towards one of the new bosses would be able to skip the 14th one. Is that fixed now?
That is fixed. That was a problem initially, yes, but that is fixed. Also, Balor, I've been watching the footage of you mapping in the background, and your map device is so goddamn extra. It is extravagant.
It's a Christmas tree, and I haven't changed it since Christmas. It's fine, don't worry about it.
Yeah. At this point, you may just keep it up until this year's Christmas.
I mean, Christmas.
Don't swap to my footage. I'm not playing Tornado Shot Corrupting Fever.
Christmas is in July, so a couple more months and you'll be there.
Yeah.
This is the same reason I don't have a Christmas tree in my house, by the way. Because if I put up a Christmas tree for Christmas, it wouldn't come down for like 4 months. I'd need one of those ADHD days where I just decide that everything is getting cleaned in the entire world. They happen once every few months where I'm just like, oh, today's a day where I deep clean the entire house. And that would be the day the Christmas tree goes away. And until then, it would just stay up. So
I can't do deep cleans. When I do deep cleans, I just go way too deep. I'm super inefficient. I get stuck on like a door of a shelf or something like that. Really have to polish it, and then there's like a fat stain or something like that I need to get off. But anyway, on the topic of juice, I noticed you, Octavian, you were very eager to say something in response to, or maybe you're just generally expressing some discontent with what I said.
What was it that you mentioned?
What I mentioned was my 2 points of frustration were the progression towards the bosses being tied to you spamming maps, basically. And so if you want to progress to the bosses efficiently, you want to skip maps. You kind of just want to run in and spawn and do that. And the other thing is that so much juice does make the maps take so long if you want to do them completely.
Well, I do. What's the way to phrase this? I do think that like there's enough interesting stuff and enough mechanics and enough like profit in basically every map that you put into the map device nowadays that like I don't really see personally the reason to just put in maps and leave until you get to the boss fight. But I shouldn't really disdain that playstyle. I don't get it. I don't understand it personally.
I watched your video where you talked about how great one of the new boss drops is, the not the crystallized omniscience amulet, the ashes of the stars, as it's called. The amulet that gives you the quality and that enables a whole bunch of alt quality gem builds. And assuming that you wanted that amulet in SSF, you would obviously want to do the boss that drops it as often as possible. And yeah, the only way to do that would be.
Are you aware of the strategy where you set up your Atlas tree for as much adjacent map drop bonus as possible?
Nope.
So Atlas bosses already have a 30% baseline chance to drop an adjacent map, and you can get a total of 70% on the Atlas tree, which means that you can literally guarantee a map drop from every single map boss that you kill. And then you favorite 2 maps that are next to each other on the Atlas. And whenever you run one, it is extremely likely the boss drops the other. 95% of the time.
Like half the time.
Yep. And you get some of the nodes that cause them to duplicate and such. And so you, even in Solo Self-Found, you literally can't run out of maps. So long as you kill the boss, you literally cannot.
Side note on that, not running out of maps, by the way, if you don't alch or chisel your map, if you just run white tier 16 maps, you can maintain one favorited map forever. If you have all the favorite slots unlocked and you just run white tier 16 maps, you never run out of that map. Which is ridiculous.
Is this a bad thing? I mean, I'm not trying to express an opinion here. Legitimately, I'm curious. Do you guys think that's a bad thing? Should map scarcity be a problem that players have to solve, or is that a thing of the past? Because I remember back in the day, the way you got players to play a mechanic, back in like Delve, for instance, was GGG just loaded it up with map drops. Like, GGG wanted people to delve, they put a ton of maps into cities. They put map nodes on the delve chart. Maps were the loot people wanted. Currency was like a secondary thing that was generated from targeting going to get maps. So like we've shifted over the leagues to maps being kind of an afterthought. Like, it doesn't really matter what strategy you're pursuing nowadays. You'll get a lot of maps. You will over-sustain. It doesn't take effort.
I'm a little mixed on that, but go ahead, Balor.
I'm just, at the beginning of the league, I was of the mindset of, wow, map drops are way too easy. This is ridiculous. This shouldn't be a thing, right? And I think that was just because I was so used to map scarcity being the thing. And with my level of investment, knowing I was going to overcome that and then be able to sell my maps as part of my profit. And so I just sort of saw it as, but you're taking away my profits. And it just took me a few weeks to get used to it. And now I'm like, no, it's definitely a good thing because now everyone can be running tier 16 maps. Like that's like, I'll find my profit elsewhere. That shouldn't be a problem. It was just something that like caught me off guard at the beginning of the league. And I was like, my profits. And then I just sort of got over it. I found profit elsewhere. And now I'm like, but now everyone gets to run tier 16 maps as much as they want. And so I think that's a good thing. I actually like it now. However, I did hide 112 map drops on my filter. So that felt weird. Because the maps, I picked out the exact maps that I like running. And then I hid every other map because they don't sell and there's no point in hiding them in having them on my filter. Like they don't sell and I over sustain the ones I do want to run. So I've just got like this group of 12 maps that show on my filter and everything else is gone.
I think where I'm at with that is I like the idea of people not hitting a wall as they're progressing their atlas, where they feel like they have to buy maps or they have to invest further or they're not even going to sustain the next map to run. But I don't like the fact that maps are so worthless now that you really do feel like they're just clutter, that you have nothing that you can do with them except hide the ones you're not going to run on your filter. And even then, there's plenty of times where tier 16 maps dropped up and like, not going back for that. It's a few extra steps. And I don't like that. I don't like maps having absolutely no innate value. So what I would like to see going forward is more things like maps have layers of delirium. Maps contain an additional blight. A reason to pick up maps and a reason to differentiate value between maps without taking away people's ability to get them at a baseline.
That's interesting that you mentioned that because I'm looking through my filter for a way to hide the maps specifically that say area contains a blight because that stops me from putting things on it that I want. It's an annoying thing and I don't want it there. I want to hide those even when they're on my good layouts.
All right, so my take on the whole thing would be I've always thought that it's fine. Like with many things in Path of Exile, like one-shotting bosses, for example, it's fine at the highest tier of content or like at the highest stage that your build reaches. But I think it's something that you should struggle to get to for a reasonable amount of time. And I felt this league, I got to the point where I was sustaining maps really, really quickly. And I don't know, maybe if it's better for the majority of players, then I don't mind it too much. But I've personally always preferred struggling for a little bit longer, having to set up things for longer until I can actually run only the maps that I want to run or that I prefer to run instead of having to run the maps that I have to run in order to get the progression. And since the progression for Atlas completion and to the bosses is much more streamlined, is much easier to get into as a newer player, I don't think that map sustain needs to be as easy to reach as it currently is. I think a lot of people would maybe not realize it, but they would probably enjoy struggling for a little bit longer, because when you struggle for a little bit longer, the point where you actually reach that satisfying stage of being able to sustain, the analogy, being able to one-shot a boss, being able to just run through a map and every pack explodes and the game is no challenge anymore and everything just becomes super flat in terms of content. Yeah, I don't mind that being a thing at the top end. I want to work towards that a little. In terms of map sustain, I don't think it's actually too easy to build a build that can ignore content at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of super strong ones, maybe some even that are too strong, but I think in general, it's a good journey for. Any thoughts on this before we move on?
So, I don't think that, at least for me, I have an issue with map sustain being easy, because there's so many other things in the game that you add onto your maps these days. And that actually brings me to something else that I don't really like about the current setup. It rains scarabs on you. It rains so many scarabs on you that I don't think I would ever physically be able to use every scarab I get as a drop. I've been using 4 per map. Now, I have been buying 2 specific ones, but even if I never bought any, I would never run out. And yes, I do more juiced content, but I would rather see something where I have a better ability to target specific content. I want more divination cards. I want more divination scarabs, so I go after those. Rather than just, here's all the scarabs. Just have all of them. Here you go. Shotgun right in your face. Scarab shotgun. Take them. We don't want them anymore. It takes away that feeling of working towards something, and it takes away the feeling of value. I used to be excited when I got a scarab. Now I'm just like, it's a rusted scarab. Then I leave it on the floor.
Wait, it's not hidden on your filter?
I need to go through and hide a bunch of scarabs on my filter. Like all the Shaper and Elder ones.
Auto sort by price. Hide lowest tier.
There was another topic that we skipped, but I think we'll keep that for in a second because this one links perfectly fine into Kirak Mapmaster, because we talked about all the juice that doesn't apply to Kirak's maps. And pretty much most of the people have stopped doing Kirak missions at a certain point of Atlas passive completion, passive tree completion. Do you think that's okay? Do you think that Kirak should be something that is a tool early on to help with progression, and then something that you choose to ignore in endgame? Or you hope that there will be some changes that make Kirak a more attractive option later in the game?
I would love it if Kirak missions got the benefit of the Atlas tree. Or if not, if there were more, wheels on the Atlas tree that were maybe dedicated to Kirak missions and making them more impactful. But honestly, just flipping the switch if they can at some point and making Kirak missions use the Atlas tree would probably be good enough. But that said, maybe it's like bias coming from the hardcore economy rather than the softcore economy. But I do still find a lot of value in Kirak missions in the end game, because I can roll into things like Minotaurs and Elder Guardians and all that sort of stuff. And those fragments are worth a lot more in hardcore than they are in softcore. So it's still pretty good value to go get that free Minotaur, free, assuming the mods aren't something like -max or crit or something like that. If it's runnable, there's still a lot of value in going and getting the boss kill and getting the fragment.
That's very fair. I didn't engage with trade at all this league, so wouldn't know about that, but I certainly agree from the SSF hardcore perspective, because there's still things that are worth running for, even if you just use the normal scouting report rerolls or Kirak, just picking out the ones that have, for example, Smuggler's Cage, because I want to get blueprints, I want to farm replica uniques, even though they seem to be extremely rare, the replica unique blueprints. It still feels like the best option that I have in order to force a random roll of whether I get a blueprint or.
So I'm not feeling that Kirak's missions are lacking. In fact, because of the way that especially scouting reports reroll them, I would say it's incredibly powerful, because Kirak missions are basically a guaranteed harvest. Almost every Kirak mission I run is, it's either a harvest or it's something better than a harvest.
Frick that mechanic. I'm not going to make friends saying that.
I hate it too, but unfortunately for a lot of the sorts of gear that I want to craft for my build, there is no other option.
Oh yeah, understandable. Entirely understandable. I don't know why over the last couple of leagues my feeling of distaste for Harvest has deepened. I just don't, even though it's kneecapped my gear progression on multiple characters now, I just don't do it. I don't want to interact with it anymore. I am tired of it. I would rather have characters that are like 20-30% weaker and not use Harvest than use Harvest. Maybe probably even like 30-40% weaker, but whatever. I can still do the things in the game I want to do.
I'm 100% with you. I hate it so much.
I also hate it. I just do it because there's a lot of things that there's no other way to do it.
Absolutely.
Like Jewel and go ahead. Then
here's what I deal with Harvest. Their mobs have increased quantity and increased rarity on them, and I'm playing an MFer. So I run in, I murder them, I open the thing, I scroll super quick to see if there's an augment, because I will sell that on TFT, because it's like 8x.
Yeah, fair.
And if there's not an augment, I just walk away. Those are just quantity and rarity mobs. That's it. By the way, still haven't found an augment. Found one total augment in total since it got reintroduced. Like, it's completely useless. I don't want it.
I'm surprised they're only 8x. That seems cheap to me.
It's because of a new crafting, largely. But jewel implicits, it's not objectively that powerful. Why are they only from Harvest? Why do I have to do this stupid mechanic just to get implicits on my cluster jewels and stuff?
I just don't. I'll just be weaker. just like Oct says, I'll just be weaker. Like, I'm fine. We have enough power, I can just choose to be weaker, so I don't have to deal with that shit. That's it. I'm done.
I would, but usually it's things like stun immunity or bleed immunity or other things that you really do want on your build.
If I get that, I'd die. I got 6 layers of defense. It's not worth doing Harvest.
Yeah, I'm very much surprised actually that we all are in total agreement about that Harvest is kind of too good to skip, but we all hate it enough that we either are willing to admit it or we are going the extra step and skipping it, or not going the extra step of doing it, so it would be beneficial. I do think, though, that the current trend that we're seeing with the Eldritch crafting being added will, over the long term of the next 4 or 5 leagues, hopefully move into the direction of Harvest becoming obsolete and other crafting methods becoming so strong that people will just voluntarily abandon it, or maybe it will just be reworked or deleted, and the crafting options that come from Harvest will be made available via other mechanics. That would also be great.
I think I'd be very much in favor of that, because when Harvest came out, I really loved it because of the in-depth way you could interact with the game's tag system. Now, once the new crafting, the Eldritch crafting, came out, initially I liked it until I realized you're not actually interacting with the game's crafting systems at all most of the time. If you're getting Eldritch implicits, you are literally just inputting currency until you get the result that you want. You have very little control. There's very little decision making. It's, do I click the currency again or do I not click the currency again? Maybe you get to use an Orb of Conflict sometimes. That's really spicy. And the thing that I loved about Harvest was crafts like Remove Non-Add, where you could understand the tags of each mod on the item and the tags of each mod in the pool, and use that to manipulate the item in ways that weren't possible ever before. Things like pseudo-meta crafting with full affixes on an item. And that was awesome. Then they took that away, and ever since, Harvest has felt like a chore. And now the new crafting, I thought it was going to fix all that. It's a good step. I like using it, but it doesn't excite me.
Yeah, I haven't really messed around a lot with the Eldritch currency orbs, the Chaos orbs, the Annuls, and the Exalt, who have a small stash of them ready in my tab to use whenever I need. But I did use the Ichors or Ichors. What is the correct pronunciation? Heard both versions, but yeah, I've used those and the Embers, and yeah, you're right. They're just basically just click, 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 click until you have the one. Basically, like the Instilling and the Flask orbs until they added them to the crafting bench. And it would be cool if there was like more nuance to using them. But I do really like the idea of like having the fact which of the two influences is dominant on the item, having that dictate the function of the currency orbs. I think that's a really cool idea. But I agree with your point that it does not really replace what Harvest did well, which was highlighting the interactions with the mod system, the tag system, and rewarding in-depth game knowledge. Oh. Anyone bought the Vault Pass? I know Balor bought the Vault Pass.
Yeah.
I forgot it existed.
I'm still really annoyed by it because almost daily I click the stupid button on my Atlas when I'm trying to go to my Atlas passives because I can't remember what the keybind is. And I want GGG to delete it just so I don't have to see that button anymore. Because I click it, and every time I click it, I'm reminded how annoying it is.
That button should just show up when you buy it.
Yes.
By the way.
Yes.
When that button should show up.
I would despise it less by a lot if that one change was made.
Yeah, I was not super like against it or super in favor of it, but I watched a couple of videos on people commenting on the negative aspects of it that they see, and I was like, well, those are not really problems that affect me, like in an overly negative way, or more than monetization options that are already in the game, like fear of missing out, or a lot of people also said that it was somewhat predatory for that same reason, but I quickly agreed. Ziz had very convincing arguments when he was on the podcast last episode, and pretty much said, it's not worse than anything that exists, and it's fine. And I guess what I want to say is I had not considered that previously, but I had a feeling that was my problem with it. Like, I didn't like that there was a button in the physical game, but I didn't mind it too much. But then in the Stalling podcast a couple of days ago, like 11 days ago, Quinn kind of nailed it with what he said, that he doesn't want the game, like in-game, to be connected with the monetization. You don't want an in-game NPC to be shilling out for the monetization option. The fact that it's Kirax Vault Pass and that it's like they're using that NPC to sort of push people into the direction of buying it. I think that even though it was shrugged off by a lot of people, or it looked like they didn't really agree with it, I think that exactly is that sums up what my biggest problem with it that still stands is. I feel like it's too integrated in the game. It should be more separated. Should be just in the store. But I do think that the MTX are beautiful and that the value is very good, assuming that you get the entire map completion. And a lot of people said that it influenced, that it affected the game economy because the Dorianis Machinarium map spiked so hard, but that returned to normal
like 12
quickly.
hours. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Also, just calm down with like value. Let's just be honest. Nothing you've ever bought from PoE is worth what you paid for it ever.
Oh yeah. I meant in the context of comparing it to PoE.
Yeah,
I disagree.
You don't get good value out of the MTXs in this game. They are way too expensive. When you buy anything, you're doing it to support GGG and getting some things just as like a side benefit.
I have gotten
way too much.
I have gotten every single penny out of my Invisible Aura MTX. I will fight you on that.
No, that's true. Actually, I've got 9 of those, and I'm probably going to have to buy more next time I make like an Aura stacker. That's insane. But otherwise, everything is overpriced.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with the price personally. I don't have an issue with the MTX. I think I've seen some very convincing arguments that the Dying Sun MTX just isn't very good. You, most of the time, with a lot of skills, won't see it. That's a very fair criticism. I have a problem with, number one, the implementation of battle passes in the way that most games do them, and also number two, with the fact that there's a button on my Atlas. It should only appear after I purchase it, and I should have to either go to the shop or the MTX pane to see the button before that.
That's the only change I'd make. I like that the button is there now that I have it, but it shouldn't be there for people who haven't bought it. That's all.
Yeah, and I think
the only change I'd make.
Even my issue with the battle pass and battle passes in games, I think it's very fixable. The fix would just be add some sort of way that, let's say you buy it at the start of a league, and you get to 100 Atlas completion and you end up quitting. Add some path that you can still earn the rest of your MTX. Maybe it's you get it automatically at the end of a league. Maybe it's you can progress it in standard. Just some way that you can still get the thing after you make the purchase.
But the
You
whole
pay
point
extra
of that
money?
thing is that the whole point of that thing is that you have to do it during the league. Otherwise, it negates the entire purpose.
But why do you have to do it? Why?
Well, 'cause
You've already...
That's the driving force. That's the marketing behind those things. That's like...
Right, but
That's everything.
that's the same marketing behind loot boxes, though, to trick you into spending more money than you wanted to. Why is that okay?
No, because loot boxes, all the stuff in them comes into the... You can just buy it later individually if there's a piece.
Right.
Look, there's a whole different thing with loot boxes,
So why-
with like gambling and stuff.
Yeah,
This
but
is
why can't
supposed to be
we
an exclusive thing?
buy the pieces of the battle pass then? That would
Because that would
solve
be a
that.
complete waste of time. That would negate the entire purpose of the entire thing.
No, you would
The
like
point-
just
the
like
point
with the
is-
loot boxes, you could buy it cheaper via the battle pass. And if you want to pay extra, then you can buy it.
Well, then I just would never buy the battle pass again. Right
Right,
now, I'm
not.
going to buy the battle pass every single league because I want to get all the exclusive things that you, if you don't get them now, you'll never get them. I want that.
But
If
you,
they
as
don't do
someone
that,
who gets like
I'll never
full,
get them.
as someone who gets full Atlas completion every league within the first 48 hours, I guess, or like at least within the first week, why would you not buy the battle pass every time if it's so significantly cheaper than the single items that would enter the store later?
Well, because I won't want all of them. I'll just buy the exact thing that I want. Like I only cared about the Headhunter one this time. That's what I wanted. I wanted my... I didn't even care about what it did in game. I just thought it looked really cool in my inventory, and I wanted it. So I would only have bought that one. You're doing something where you would let people do that and complete it without being in the league or outside of the league's time frame would negate the entire purpose. You might as well not have one to begin with. You would lose so much money. Like it's not a thing. That's a...
Any company that can only get money by dishonest means doesn't deserve it.
This isn't
And-
dishonest.
It is, because
Not
it's
even
abusing the
close.
fact that there's dozens of players who will buy it without having completed their Atlas, thinking, well, if I don't buy it now, someday when I own that Headhunter, I won't be able to use this cool MTX for it. And then they will reach a stall point in the game where they don't complete the Atlas, and they still won't have the MTX. But they'll try harder. They'll keep playing the game past the enjoyment point. They'll end up burning out on the game and feeling bitter and feeling resentment.
Who's
And
forcing
so-
you to buy it before you get full Atlas completion? If that's what you want. You
I mean-
want the highest tier of reward. You just wait
That-
until you got the Atlas complete.
Because that's not how consumers think.
Okay, there's an amount of this weird thought process you've got. There's an amount of like just ownership of your own decisions. Like, I don't know. Like, if you've never completed the Atlas before, what makes you think you can do it now? Like, if you're allergic to dairy and I have an ice cream in the window and that you pass that and go, oh, that's really nice, and you buy it, is that the ice cream shop's fault that you've got to go shit yourself for 10 hours? You knew you won't. You knew you shouldn't be eating ice cream. That's on you. What do you mean?
Sure, in the case of someone who's never done it, but what about someone who they've played for the last 3 leagues, and last league they completed the Atlas?
I mean,
And-
if you've ever done it before, you can do it even easier now. It's incredibly easy to do now, comparatively to in the past.
I mean, yes, it's relatively easy, but there's still a lot of people who don't get there. And there's a lot of people, there's even people that I've talked to who have run into issues with other games where they run into this same problem multiple times where they buy a battle pass, they don't do the tasks for the battle pass because they've gone past their enjoyment of the game. And they feel forced to because they're now losing the actual real world money that they put in. And it pushes people away from the game as a whole in the long term. That having that path, like let's say you could only buy it during the league, but you could get those things at any time. You could finish your battle pass in any future league. You could only buy it right now. That way someone can say, okay, someday I might own a Headhunter. I want that really cool Headhunter MTX. and they wouldn't be punished for the fact that, let's just say they say, I'm at 100 Atlas completion and I'm just really not enjoying this.
If you do that, it instantly loses all of its appeal to anyone who's after anything that's exclusive like that. I like the exclusiveness. That's the reason I bought it. If you did that, I wouldn't buy it. It doesn't make any sense.
Even if the price point was like really high?
I mean, I'm relatively poor, so no, I've missed MTXs. I've missed entire bundles of their MTXs for like leagues and stuff that I wish I could have bought because I couldn't afford them. But that's the onus is on me. If I've got the money to spend it. If you're spending money you don't have, that's a problem, and it's got nothing to do with the game. This doesn't make any sense to me.
I see that point, but I also see what Tenkiei is trying to say. Like, if I may rephrase it in my own words, is like, yeah, it's your fault if you overspend, but as a company, you shouldn't rely for a large part of your revenue on people overspending. Like, you shouldn't lean into that in order to make your money. I guess that's the point there.
But that's
like,
not what's
people
happening.
make
Nothing's
bad decisions.
hidden on it. Like, nothing's hidden on it. They're very clear and upfront about exactly what you'll need to require and exactly what you'll get at exactly every stage. Nothing is hidden. Nothing about it is unethical in any way.
Its very existence is unethical, though, because it's designed to predate the consumer, just like how loot boxes, even GGG's loot boxes, are innately unethical because they're designed to predate people who have poor impulse control or an addiction to gambling.
So I don't like the loot boxes exist. I think those are a very different thing. I think we agree on loot boxes. I keep buying them, which is counterproductive because if no one bought them, they'd stop using them. And I do think they're a bad thing and I should stop using them, but I'm using them because I can. But that's irrelevant. That's a completely different thing, though. These are not related.
Wait, you're saying that you're buying loot boxes even though you shouldn't, so you're basically a victim of predatory practice.
Well,
but you don't see the issue could also appear with the battle pass, where people who shouldn't buy it.
Could appear, but they're so very, very separated from, like, they are not at all the same thing. There's no risk involved. There's no, I just need this one more piece. I mean, I've got nearly the whole set. I'm just gonna buy one more and see if I can get. Oh man, I still didn't get that chest. I'll just grab one more and see if I can get. Oh man, I still didn't get it. That's not a thing. The battle pass. You know, the biggest mistake they made with the battle pass was calling it a battle pass because it doesn't really function like the battle passes in most other games. This is a super clear, very low entry level progression of you will get exactly this at exactly these intervals with the finished, completed version being something that can be done by an experienced player in 14 hours, and at this point can be done by pretty casual players by the end of the league incredibly easily, with exact points shown to you before you buy it of what progression you would need to get each reward. There's nothing. The worst thing they did was call it a battle pass. It barely even is compared to what battle passes are in other games. There are some super predatory looking battle passes in other games. If they used a different name, I don't even think people would be upset. It's nothing like that. It's not predatory at all. It doesn't make any sense.
It's certainly less predatory than loot boxes, but I don't really see how you can say that it isn't predatory when it's still forcing players to do a specific thing that the developer wants because that makes them money, even to the player's own detriment or the detriment of a player's enjoyment. For example, someone who only wants to play standard now must play the league if they want any of the MTX.
Nope. You can log into the league, you can buy the battle pass, and you can finish everything on standard. You can only do it during the league, though.
Right.
Okay.
Once the league is over, it's over. It's too late.
Okay, I stand corrected on that then, because I was told from someone that they could not get progress in standard
No, you can't get progress in standard.
So
because
I
in
haven't
standard, you
tested
just
it,
run
but
a
I
tier
have-
16 map from previous Atlas series, and you have all the completion up to there.
So I didn't
completely
test
choose
it
the
because I
completion.
already had it all, but I had someone. I had two different people in chat that were saying they just have done it in standard because they don't play League. I'm under the impression that they just went and they
No.
collected one of every map and they just went and ran them.
I thought that was
I was told that someone tried to do that in standard and that they didn't get it. That they had to do it in the league and they had to play the league. That their standard Atlas completion did not count for it.
Well, now
Haven't we always had MTXs that you can only get by playing in the league? That's just called challenge rewards, right?
Yes. The difference is that this is tied to real world money. And that is the very big differentiating factor for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say here, just quickly correct you, Balor, because this was unless they changed it in the meantime, this was
I could
clarified
be
in
wrong.
the Q&A
I
on the
haven't.
Kirax Battle Pass. It says, is the pass available for standard players? No, at this stage it is only available to players in the current Challenge League, because many standard players can instantly unlock their whole Atlas by completing a single map.
Right. So, like I said, I mean, I don't play standard. I just had someone in chat be like, I only play standard and I got it. But that's just like someone talking. And I don't.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you
And-
can buy the
know.
Battle Pass, but you can't get the completion.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem that you can't complete it in the way that you want to play the game, which is a very weird decision to say.
Is there not then a statement you can say that, like, well, if you're a standard player, don't fucking buy it? Like, I don't know. Like, if you live alone and you don't have a license, don't buy a car because that would be a waste of your money. Like,
Sure.
How much hand holding do we need to do? Are we responsible for everybody's individual decisions in the world? If
It's
people
not
make
about
stupid choices. Is that our fault? Like, no.
It's not about that. It's about the fact that as a company, GGG is financially pushing people to do a specific thing to make them more money. That they want players to get off of standard and into the league.
So the entire business model they've had since the moment they launched?
I don't know. I don't have a particularly strong opinion on this, which is why I've been fairly quiet. But like, the very existence of leagues is doing that, right? Like, there's new shiny mechanic that you can't do in standard.
Yeah. From a gameplay perspective, yes, but I'm talking about from a monetization perspective.
Okay.
Because you
Like
gave them money you
limited
need.
time packs, like expansion packs that only exist for 6 months, or league packs that only, to a
if
year,
I'm a
or
standard
league
player, I
packs
can
that
just-
only exist for a month.
But if I'm a standard player, I can just buy those.
All right, but the same like limited time frame exists. Like,
It's not the limited time frame that I had an issue with, though. I am fine with a limited time frame. I'm not fine with the limited time frame and you don't get what you paid for by the end of that time frame. Because the price is balanced assuming you complete everything, and not everyone will, and not everyone is given a path to, so they either have to choose, do I not buy Kirax Vault Pass, or do I do this thing playing the league that I do not enjoy because that is what I must do to get the rewards from Kirax Vault Pass?
so don't buy it. What do you mean? No one's forcing anyone to buy it.
Yeah, I feel like we're
the only part of this that has validity in any way is the fact that the button is there every time I open the Atlas.
That is
That is
annoying.
literally the only part that has any validity to that argument, and that should only show up if that only showed up once I bought the pass. Everything else in that argument doesn't make any sense.
I think maybe we've circled this dead horse, beating it with sticks long enough.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is like, I don't think we're gonna reach a consensus between Balor and Tenkiei on this, but I'm very grateful for you, like, generously outlining your thoughts on this and providing a lot of interesting talking points. If I may say one last thing, though, it should be purchasable for points. It shouldn't. That really leaves a weird taste in my mouth. Is like, as someone who has been gifted a really high tier supporter pack last league and was sitting on a lot of points, the pass came out and I was like, oh cool, I can pay for this with the amount of points that I have. It's like, no, you can't buy it with points. You have to spend actual money in order to get it. was like,
That also would make sense. Even if the points was like equal, if I could buy it with money or points, but the points was how much I would have spent in money to get them, but I've just already spent that money. And I could be like, oh, I would like to make sure that I use those. That would be good. That would be fine.
That would definitely be something that would make me feel more comfortable with it as well. Other issues are still outstanding, but I don't like the fact that there's this subconscious idea of, oh, well, you bought a $60 supporter pack and that's not good enough.
Exactly. Like, the person who already made a purchase decision last league gets punished by not being able to spend that what they spend then onto that pack. Whereas, like, the person who hesitated last league to spend money now gets to use that money on the pass. So you're kind of like rewarding the people who didn't opt to support the last league. But
just the last thing real quick. This all sounds super passionate, and Tenkiei and I are on opposite sides of this argument. But also, Tenkei's one of my like favorite people in the world. Like we get along fine. We're good friends. We would have this argument for an hour later, and we might because
sometimes
I like it.
Not sometimes. It's always more fun to argue with your friends than random people anyway.
Yeah, like nothing. We're not. We'll sit here. I could sit here and yell at him for an hour, and we'd still be friends afterwards. It's fine.
Exactly. And that'll probably happen at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
But it was a
We'll
good
move on
conversation
from
to have. And moving from this, where Octavian admittedly didn't have a lot that he wanted to say, we're moving to a topic where I think Octavian will have a lot of valuable insight. That is the topic of the self-casting rework. GGG did set themselves a goal with this patch to make more spells viable for self-cast users. And I think Octavian played Frostbolt. You played Frostbolt. You played another
Stormcall.
Right. Stormburst is a channeling skill. How do you feel about the place of self-casting right now in the game after those?
I think it's extremely dependent on cast speed. Stormcall has a 0.5 base cast time, and Frostbolt has a almost 0.8 base cast time. And that difference was enough for it to feel really awkward to play Frostbolts and great to play Stormcall, even though the damage of the builds, given the amount I invested into both of them, was relatively similar. It just felt significantly worse to play Frostbolt to me. And that is, there's an element of it being quite subjective there. I have a certain level of snappiness that I want in a given build. I'm not someone who needs to clear a map in 30 seconds to have fun, but I also don't like slow plotting gameplay all that much. So not since I pushed Herald of Agony to level 100 in hardcore, at least. That killed the slow plotting gameplay style for me pretty permanently. But yeah, I actually think GGG did a pretty good job with the self-cast buffs, but there's a few decisions over the last couple of leagues that have perplexed me. I was talking about this on stream before the podcast earlier today, actually. One of the nerfs that came bundled with the Archmage nerfs was a change to Arcane Surge that I still don't really quite understand, as well as a lot of reductions in cast speed on the tree and in ascendancies and such. And they just kind of turned around and went, well, here, have 50% cast speed on a weapon now. And I like that they're giving cast speed back, because I think it is far and away the most important stat for self-casting to feel good. But it's just, it confuses me that they wouldn't then also maybe go back on some of the nerfs that they made, and maybe don't lump all of the power into the itemization and force self-cast builds to essentially get like double cast speed rings and cast speed weapons and stuff to start to feel solid.
I love it. I think you've nailed it. I'm pretty sure it was like 3 podcasts ago, like right at the beginning of the league, might have been 2, when we were talking about what the self-cast buffs were going to do. And I said basically the same thing. I said they've almost missed the mark head to toe on what you need to do for self-cast, because what they should have done was nearly halve the cast speed of every spell in the game and the mana cost so that you could maintain it, and then balance the damage accordingly. And if that means that some spells had to do less damage per cast, but got me casting them smoothly, that's what self-casting would need to feel good.
And it doesn't even have to be skills that like instantly do their damage. But if you're going to have something that's slow, I've been playing, unsurprisingly, some Elden Ring lately. And there are really slow, heavy-hitting things in that game that feel super satisfying to use. But like the slow, heavy-hitting nature is, it's got this like big wind-up and then there's huge damage. It's like slams. I freaking loved playing slams. And I still do play them occasionally on things like Slayer, even though they're much weaker than they used to be, because they got that feeling right with slams. You have the setup of, a couple of war cries or something, or dropping your totems, and then you have the big slow attack that chunks the enemy for a ton. And the animations are smooth and the gameplay is fun, but it's not the case with Frostbolt, and presumably with other spells that have a 0.8 cast time that are similarly straightforward and basic. Like, I don't know. I don't know if they need to do a similar thing with slams, or they add rotation skills. I don't think every archetype should go in that direction. So something like Divine Ire is a great example of a skill that feels snappy to use, but does have that behavior of, build up release. Divine Ire, you can get enough cast speed to make it near instant, but most versions of it aren't exactly instant. There's some build up and then there's the release, but that still feels smooth to use. It feels good to play. It doesn't. Not everything, I'm not trying to say everything has to have a 0.4 base cast time, but if it doesn't, then it needs to compensate for that in some way that makes it feel good to use.
The reason Divine Eye gets away with it is because during the channel, you're instantly doing that some amount of damage.
That's true.
I think that's the reason it feels okay. With, by the way, my most hated skill in the game because of design, Flame Blast. Flame Blast is completely backwards and it doesn't make any sense. Flame Blast should start at its maximum radius, doing its minimum amount of damage.
There's an
then
alternate
shrink and get stronger.
There's an alternate quality that does that.
I was going to say.
Yep. With Ashes of the Stars, you can basically make Flame Blast into a better skill.
For me, hand casting is in a really odd spot because it shows the innate power disparity between a lot of the different spell skills. There are a lot of skills that are just bad. That another spell is the same damage pattern, but bigger numbers, or better cast speed. For the skills that were already pretty good as skills, they're much more playable now. But I don't think it really solved a lot of the innate disparities. It brought things into playability for people who really want to play self-cast or hand-cast skills. The underlying issue, which GGG even talked about, was you don't have great defenses when you're sitting there tunneling. And they fixed that with damage, which, yes, means you can tunnel, then move, then tunnel, but to me doesn't reduce the fact that that playstyle isn't particularly enjoyable. I would have rather see something like, let's call it the Arcane Turret guard skill, that when you are stationary, it gives you additional defensive bonuses. And I think that would have helped address the issue in a broader way, rather than just making the okay skills good and leaving the bad ones unplayable. Not to say that there shouldn't have been any numerical changes to damage.
But yeah, to answer the question directly, I guess, Catmaster, I think they did a pretty decent job with the hand casting buffs, but it was a band-aid fix. The numbers did need to be bigger on a lot of the spells. Like, number bigger, good. But I think the problems are a little deeper than that. I'm actually planning on playing another hand casting build next. So, like, I'm going back to it. I'm enjoying them.
Stormbrand is a handcast skill, guys. Could we do something about that, please?
I have no idea what I would want to play if I were going to play handcast. There is a reason I have a strong preference in Path of Exile for damage over time skills. It just feels really good to deal damage while you're moving around and not standing still. Makes a lot of boss fights a lot easier. You can just endlessly run around and deal damage without having to exactly know every window of opportunity where you can stand still to get some casts in. Sure, there's still some moments where you have to cast, but not nearly as frequently, and that allows you to weave in utility skills rather than your main damage skill. Because if I put out my Wintertide brand and my Cold Snap, that lasts a couple of seconds, so that next time I stand still, I can use an Enduring Cry to maintain my endurance charges and to recover some life. I can use Flame Dash to reposition or something like that, although that's instant. Used it recently, but yeah, you have. I just feel it's just better.
Just as a point about that, you can place down 3 ballista totems in the time it takes you to cast 1 frostbolt. And then my ballista totems then stay there for 20 seconds doing damage, and my 1 frostbolt goes. Thump.
Frostbolt does hit like a goddamn truck now, though. Like, I will give it that. It does have big number.
Yeah, but even if we're being the most fair, and then it hits and then returns and hits again, you're still standing still for a lot longer. And those ballista totems will also take 5% of the damage from the hits against you. So they even have more defenses, and that's my problem with the Band-Aid.
And they'll block projectiles. Like,
yes.
Yeah, it's rough. Because, I mean, I've seen versions of that Frostbolt build that I was playing that were, just used, high impact mine or something, and went Saboteur, Scion Sub-Ascendancy Sab, and looked like a way better build. And that was kind of what they were trying to avoid with the changes. And nope. Still better to do this much. I did really enjoy Stormcall, though. Like, I don't want to be entirely negative. I want to hammer home that point. Stormcall felt great. Stormcall felt snappy. It felt really fun to be playing a build where, like, there wasn't all these in-betweens and stuff. I just press button, damage happened. Press button, damage happened. That was really nice. I think I would have been more disappointed with Stormcall if I hadn't been able to get a Woke Spell Cascade for 1 Exalt. I don't know why they're so cheap this league, but it was disgustingly cheap. I think they're like 35C now or something. They've been going down the whole league long.
They're free.
Unbelievable.
I might be giving Reap a try later in the league just because of that as well. Waggle's been playing a Reap build, and it looks so good. Man's got like 7k life and 1k energy shield. He's got like 80-something all res. He does like 5 million DPS. It's just one of the best all-around builds I've seen this league. But that's Waggle. He always does that.
Reap is one of those skills where I tried really hard to like it, and I hate it because it had a dead zone. If you cast it in certain places near enemies, it will just not damage them, and I hate skills with dead zones.
Yep. I liked Reap as a cast on crit because it never hit the dead zone. Cyclone just is in the area that is good for it.
On the note of gems, with all the increases to the availability of cast speed sources on stuff, on hand basis also have higher values now in the mod pool, and the nerfs to Unleash. Is there any reason to use the Unleash support gem now outside of Blade Vortex?
It was really nice when I leveled my Spark character.
Yeah,
otherwise,
I don't think Unleash is in a great spot, personally.
I don't think Unleash is in a good spot either.
Yeah.
Well, should it be in a good spot?
Yeah.
It's
cool.
Everything in theory.
Yeah, I think that if they wanted to split self-cast into the Spell Echo versus Unleash playstyle, with Spell Echo leaning more into Intensify and Unleash leaning more into higher damage but hit and run, I think that'd do a lot to fix the problems. Where if you go Spell Echo Intensify, you're more of a turret. You will have better defenses because you have to, because you will get hit by more things. But then Unleash is a viable option for the higher damage hit and run stuff. You're burstier. It just doesn't quite work that way. And Cast on Crit Strike still exists and is just a better version of both right now.
Or mines, or traps, or totems.
Yes.
Everything is still better than self-cast.
There's some really solid self-cast builds out there. I think I don't know. I don't think it's going to storm the meta, but I didn't want to be entirely negative in my review. Stormcall felt great. Dan has a sick looking Blazing Salvo character.
Oh my god.
Waggle has the Reap build. The spicy memes that I want to take on next is a pure Hydrosphere build, because they buffed its numbers actually quite a lot. And somebody in my chat has been playing it and took down Feared with pure Hydrosphere.
Oh.
Which is neat.
I'll tell you the next meme shit I want to try. You know that link skills that got added?
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing saying that I can't have two different sets of links and link to two different things. Which means that if you have some Dancing Deverish, and there's two of them, you can set up two different 6 links if you get like a pseudo 6-link helmet or whatever. And you can do stuff like Frostbolt Ice Nova and set one of them on each of them, and you can have the Dancing Deverish go and do their things.
Can you actually cast Link on Dervish?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
And when they expire, it doesn't count as death, so it doesn't kill you.
Well, that's good. A little easier to get XP.
Look, I think it's going to be a good build, just to be clear. But it is going to be hilarious.
Sounds like a cool concept.
I don't really think it's a meme build, but something I'm very strongly considering is a physical Tornado Shot Slayer with the Gluttonous Tide. Because you can just import Master of Metal, and all of a sudden you have the best part of a champion for Impale builds. And then you have all the nice Overleech stuff, and Tornado Shot seems like a skill that was made for Gluttonous Tide, or maybe vice versa.
I have to bring that up on the screen because I don't remember it. Oh, it's the new bow, right? On that, I guess many additional arrows based on the frenzy charges that you lose that it expends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've heard from other people that one is a pretty good build here or there. It's a neat bow.
Was there anything on the topic list we hadn't gotten to?
I think we already covered most of the last talking points that I highlighted now with about the bosses. We covered them in the context of the other topics. I assume like maybe we haven't really talked about the difficulty of the bosses. We definitely talked a little bit about their rewards. They're cool. The Asses of the Stars thing. Well, are there any other uniques that you'd like to highlight? Maybe one that needs a little bit of work. I was looking at the shield that you can get from Searing Exarch. Got the name, but I was looking at it as a Righteous Fire Inquisitor, and I was wondering whether that would make sense to use it, because it converts a lot of incoming damage to fire damage, but it doesn't come with a life roll, if I recall correctly. I haven't run the math on it, but I'm not sure how well it works or how worth it would be to use that over a rare shield, which would raise your max res and allow you to get a huge, in case of a spellcaster shield, you can get +1 fire gems and a large percentage of increased fire damage if you want it.
I think if we're talking the context of SSF, it's a pretty good thing to consider. If we're talking the context of trade, it's not Aegis Aurora, and it's not a rare. And Fizz taken as is good, but the problem is a lot of that is elemental taken as fire, which doesn't matter because in Trade League you should be using Melding of the Flesh, so you're not gaining any benefit from taking other elemental types as fire.
Because you already have max res.
Yeah.
Like a perfect rolled melding is like 1x. If you go to like 1% off, they're like 30C.
That's silly.
So it's kind of cool. I also think the downside is just a bit too harsh of losing 1% chance to block attack damage for every 200 fire damage taken from hits recently. I feel like given the damage numbers in PoE, that should be like 2,000 fire damage taken from hits recently.
That does seem incredibly high.
I mean, it might as well just read you cannot block attacks.
Yeah, that's how I would treat it if I was going to use it. And just be like, okay, so no block in this build.
Well, it also gives you huge flat block. I mean, against bosses, you don't get hit often, but you get hit hard. And this allows you to get a large amount of block, one item. Base is 23, and then you get up to 25 explicitly. That's 48% chance to block. Pretty neat on a shield. But it only really works well if you don't get hit more than a couple of times per second.
But also by spells, because if you just take any fire damage.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It doesn't have to be attack damage.
Yeah.
Which,
All right, and since it converts the incoming damage, it kind of ruins that because you take fire damage from almost
you take
any
fire
hit.
on anything.
yes.
Right. Plus the boots from Maven, right? They have Scourge.
If it just lost like the bonus block on the shield, and it had a floor, like it didn't go below 20-something% chance to block, then it might be fine. But the fact that this can theoretically chunk your block all the way down to 0 in the wrong situation is pretty nasty.
Yep. All right, got that covered. Any other uniques you want to mention, or no? We'll just talk one last topic, and that is like, do you think that the bosses are good balance and design kind of way? Do they provide enough challenge for people who want to challenge themselves? Because they are significantly easier, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but they're significantly easier than the existing endgame bosses, Maven and Uber Elder.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
They're more of Guardian level difficulty, I'd say.
Yeah. And do you think that that's okay like that? Or do you think there's room for maybe making them harder or adding harder versions of them later down the road? Because that's what I'd really like to see.
There's definitely room for harder versions, and I'd like to see them made a little bit harder. Simply because whenever something is too easy, I find it leads to more of a negative experience. Either you do it the first time and it's really easy, so you're not that impressed, or you do it and you fail, and so you feel worse because you know it objectively wasn't that hard. Or it just doesn't prepare you for the actual challenging thing, which was a big problem back in the day with Atziri versus Uber Atziri. There was a huge difficulty gap between the two bosses, to the point where Atziri did not prepare you for Uber Atziri. So I'd like to see their baseline increased a bit, but as a result, the top end of how rippy they can be with map mods may be lowered a bit.
I really liked Zizaran's point that he brought up, quoting the last podcast again, but I think he also said it on his own podcast, that it's kind of silly that they didn't implement like the special mods because that's how I understood what Chris said in the interview, is that they had their own mod pool that they could roll separate from maps, or at least to some extent. And it would be really cool to have like, I don't know, different ball sizes for the Searing Exarch fight, different ball speeds, or reduce Maven's ability to remove the balls. So many like little specific things that you could do to make those fights play out differently than just increasing speed, life, or damage.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I would love to see a boss invitation only mod pool that replaces what we currently have for them. Because there's so many of those things that it makes sense in the context of a map, and it does not make very much sense in the context of a boss. It's just extra numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that was being brought up is that the quantity doesn't really affect all that much what you get from the boss drops, so there's very little incentive rolling those. Have you got any experience with that? Do you feel like it's worth it to roll them?
With the power level of my characters, the difference between rolled versus unrolled is so trivial that I only know what a rolled fairly high quant one looks like.
that up on this podcast, Mathil was very adamant about the difference not being significant at all. So just run them white, which makes it a little bit more bearable that the mods are not very interesting and not very engaging. But at the same time, it also makes it a little bit worse because there's no reason to roll them at all. Might as well run them white.
I really haven't done most of the bosses. I think my favorite, I don't really care. I think my favorite part about the new bosses is that they just drop invitations I can sell. I'm just really enjoying mapping too much. It was just the last system was sort of like, oh, it's Cirrus time. I have to fight Cirrus. And I've like purpose built a character with literally the exact amount of DPS it needs to do the maps it's in. It can't boss. I don't have any defenses. I don't want to boss on that character. I just love that I'm not forced to now. I can be like, oh, I'll just map all day, and oh look, I've got 6 boss invites. I'll just sell them and continue doing what I want to do, which is perfect. I just want to not be forced into things.
Yeah, and that is a very good part of a new system, both with the Atlas passives and the new bosses. There's a lot less that you're forced into doing if you don't want to. I feel like it's maybe swung a little too far in regards to certain rewards, like I mentioned Scarabs before, but for the general content of the game, I think it's in a very good spot.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I kind of like the systems. But I still want to drive that point home again. I want to fight those bosses in harder versions. They're so cool thematically, and what we said earlier with the clear communication of the visuals, and they're just really cool designed boss fights. I know a lot of people don't like the Unending Hunger, but it did receive some changes. The corrosive debuff has been changed from like a flat armor and evasion reduction to like percentage, and I think there's another way to shake them off now. And since the new patch, again, I feel like I didn't do my due diligence by not reading the most recent patch notes for this discussion, but I did glance over it a little bit, and maybe they'll get to the point where that fight is a little bit better, feels a little bit better for other people. I did definitely think it was inventive, though.
Yeah, I think it's a cool concept, but they just need to remove the transition entirely.
The transition to the poop face.
Yes. Because unfortunately, the best way to deal with that is, I don't know if you can just log, but if you die, you instantly go back to fighting the boss.
You cannot log out. You go back into the downstairs, get fucked hardcore.
So basically, yeah, it takes so long that the best way to do it is to just wait till you level up and then die doing them all.
Yeah.
I just built... I completed all of the maps on my Atlas before I did any of my quest versions of the boss, and I brute forced them with enough damage to phase him before the swamp phase happened.
Yep.
Yeah, that would do too.
The best way.
I haven't fought him since I was pretty undergeared. I fought him once, maybe twice. That was it.
In hardcore, the strategy is brute force him with enough damage so you don't have to do the swamp phase, and then never fight him ever again because his loot table is awful and there's no reason to risk it. The risk-reward ratio is entirely off on the mini-bosses. Neither of them are worth doing in hardcore.
Even with the Polaric Devastation?
Polaric Devastation meaning... Is that what she says, or is that an item that I'm not aware of?
A ring from the Black Star that gives Ash and Frost.
I think an item I'm not aware of. Let me look it up.
Yeah, it's a new item. I would consider it to be pretty powerful.
That doesn't look like a very hardcore item, is the first thing I'm going to say, because it has no life or defensive tools on it. But, I mean, you could argue covering enemies in Ash or Frost is a defensive tool, because it does slow them. Actually, covered enemies in Frost causes them to take less, or have less critical strike chance. That's pretty nice. It's not that good, though, because you only cover them in Frost when you freeze them. So you're very rarely going to get that buff against anything that, like, any bosses or anything like that.
Unless you're an occultist.
Yeah, true. Or unless you just have, really, really, really high damage versus some bosses. But at that point, like, you don't really need it. I doubt it's worth much. I can look it up and see how much it would be worth, but my suspicion is that this is not going to be something that it carries a lot of value in hardcore trade. There is one online right now for 3x. And there's a bunch offline for the same price that have been up for a week. So it doesn't seem like they're selling, but maybe I'm wrong. Personally, I wouldn't say that that's worth the risk, no.
Think it's that risky?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe the fight was bugged when I did it, but I definitely just stood in the meteor that you're supposed to line of sight behind the pillar because I was mispositioned, and it didn't kill me because I had the debuffs from the floor.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can definitely get through the fight relatively easily, but maybe I have a warped view of it because the first time I tried to do it, my FPS dropped down to 15 and I couldn't control my character and then I died. So I don't really like going back.
That's understandable.
That's why I got enough damage to just kill her before she did more than one round of abilities the second time I fought her. And again, like, I have not fought this boss a lot. I don't know if anyone else on the podcast has, but how often does she really drop the ring? Because I didn't even know this existed.
I fought her 5 times and I got the ring once.
Okay.
That sounds
because
like
most of the time when I fight the mini bosses, literally nothing shows up on my filter.
Same.
They die and not a single thing. I hit Alt to confirm they didn't just bug and not drop anything. It's just a bunch of blue items with a couple rares.
Yeah, or
yeah.
you have the item highlighting off.
Yeah, same, but also I'm pretty sure that Embers and the ring are the only thing that could show up on my filter from her, and the other guy, I don't think his unique even shows up on my filter. So that could bias it.
And whereas with the bigger bosses, you have, the potential for getting one of the jewels that can be worth tens of exalts, depending on which one you get. Or you can, either of the amulets is worth 3 to 4x in hardcore, and they're not that rare. I've seen 2 or 3 of those drop in the ones that I farmed at this point. And any individual player's drop rates are all going to be pretty hard to make any meaningful conclusions off of, though, to be fair. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's one of the few flaws with the new bosses is that the mini bosses feel pretty pointless. They're cool fights. Well, Black Star is a cool fight. Swamp Guy is not as much of a cool fight, but we've belabored that point. The one issue that we haven't really touched on that I have with the Swamp Guy, I think it's just a bug because it doesn't seem like intended. But he can queue up an animation at the same time as going underground, so he'll play the animation out while being completely invulnerable because the game thinks he's underground. And then after the animation finishes, he'll instantly warp to where he would have been underground if he hadn't been doing his earlier animation. And also will do damage as he warps sometimes, like the burrowing damage. So you just won't know where he's going to pop up because he's moving, but he's moving invisibly because he's in the middle of a slam, and that's the animation the game is showing you. And you can't damage him in the slam, but the slam can damage you. It's really not pleasant.
That can't be intended. That sounds terrible. I didn't notice that, but I did notice that the unburrow does a big chunk of damage. Everything else seems fairly easy to avoid. This is like long telegraph.
Mm-hmm.
But the unburrow sometimes feels clunky. Sometimes feels like it happens faster. Sometimes like I want to trigger the unburrow and dash away, and sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. And I haven't quite been able to point my finger on what the issue is there. What would be the correct play? So I just run away from him when he burrows, which kind of wastes time in which you could DPS. Yeah. You're not able to do him in one phase, that means you go underground again. But I haven't fought him since the changes, so I hope that those alleviate some of the troubles that we all have with the phasing. Yeah, I feel like we've pretty much covered it all, and I want to, before we end things, give everyone a chance to outline their future plans for the next couple of days or for the next build or whatever you are excited to do right now in Path of Exile. You can share some of the excitement with your players. And I guess I want to shine the spotlight on Octavian here because we've been seeing your Lightning Trapper that you just started recently, and you haven't given us an outline of that when we first started talking during the introduction round.
It's an alternate element scaling lightning trapper. I use Call of the Brotherhood for partial conversion to cold, and then stack some flat fire dispels from the weapon and an Abyss Jewel, and just using Flame Wall. And I'm using the Divergent Lightning Trap as well, which gives the projectiles a 20% chance to return. I was initially thinking of using Ashes, but as I've played with it, I've realized it's not really necessary, because the way that it works is every trap can hit an enemy initially when it pops, and then a second time on return. And so it doesn't matter if more than one projectile returns from a trap. It can only still get, one additional hit. And 20% chance is enough when you have 9 projectiles per trap. So I'm just going for a rare amulet there. Probably just going to put some of the finishing touches on it. I need a level 21 gem. I need a weapon that's better. I don't have plus gems there. I need gem levels, basically. I don't have a gem level scaling amulet yet. I need gem levels. Woke added lightning to level 5. But once I've got that into a place where I'm happy with it and gotten some money, because I'm pretty poor in hardcore trade, every time I get currency, I've been dumping it back into the build. I want to play that self-cast Hydrosphere build that I was briefly mentioned earlier, because they buffed it in a number of ways. They buffed its base tick rate, I believe. They buffed the numbers on it, just like the flat damage numbers on it. And they also added Ashes of the Stars, which, again, is my favorite unique, basically ever. I'm using it in almost every build because the default quality of Hydrosphere is tick rate or cast rate or whatever. It's not, so cast speed and tick rate are two different things with Hydrosphere. Tick rate does not scale off of cast speed, and that's how quickly it just pulses when it's affected by an ailment. And Ashes of the Stars amplifies that quite significantly. And also, whenever you move it, so whenever you cast, it will hit. So you combine your tick rate and your cast speed to get your DPS if you're able to sit and spam cast it on a boss and just move it an inch back and forth. So you can get Hydrosphere to hit for 400 or 500k average hit, and then you multiply that by your cast speed, and then you multiply that by the tick rate, and you actually get some solid damage. And on top of that, I also just want to play a build where I'm a wizard directing my orb through the map and through packs of monsters, just going, go over there, kill them. Because it deals damage as it travels. As it's moving from one place to another, it'll chunk things that it passes through. So I feel like an old school D&D wizard moving around the sphere of force, or whatever that spell was back in 3.5.
The only parallel that comes to mind for me is Orianna from League of Legends, the moving ball. That's kind of cool.
That build needs to be named Orianna. That is exactly Orianna.
Flaming Sphere, that was the spell in D&D 3.5. You could summon a big flaming sphere. There was also a spell called Sphere of Defenestration, which you could use to knock people out of windows. Or out of other things, but it specifically out of windows. It was very good at that.
Sounds brilliant. I was just going to suggest using reverse knockback memes on that build, but then I realized that it's not a separate entity from your character. It's not like a totem where it would knock back to itself, but it would just knock back to your character, right? Or from your point of view.
Yep.
Wouldn't make it better. It would just cost a lot of investment in the glove slot. But yeah, Tenkiei, what are your plans? Are you going to roll another build next to your RF? Specialized for something else, or is that your all-round character and it's the one that you're gonna stick to until the end of the league?
I'm definitely going to be rolling another build. I'm not 100% sure when, though. What I need to decide, well, right now I'm just doing a bunch of Expedition because Expedition's fun. I need to decide if I'm going to do a bunch of Expedition and farm a Mage Blood and roll a build with that, or if I'm going to do a bunch of Expedition and put all the money into rolling the next build, whatever it may be.
So you haven't decided at all on what you find interesting?
I haven't decided build-wise, no. I mean, there's that idea of the Gluttonous Tide that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
And there's a couple other things that I've thrown around. Like someday I'm going to be playing Poisonous Concoction, but probably not until next league because it's a great starter build and I might as well play it in that context. I've also been throwing around a couple of Spectral Helix ideas and a couple of Rage Vortex ideas, but I haven't decided between any of that.
All interesting concepts, though. I'll be curious, or I am curious to see what you're going to end up deciding for and how it plays out. Well, same question to you, Balor. What are you doing after the MF? I mean, obviously you're using the MF to generate a metric ton of currency. And,
I have a proper like min-max Mage Blood wearing build planned that, as far as I can tell, doesn't exist. No one's doing it, and I think it's going to be really cool, but I don't want to tell everyone what that is yet. And in between that, I want to make my garbage meme character that's not... it's definitely going to be bad, but like, I want to see if I can make it work anyway, just because I think it'll be hilarious to have 2 dancing dervishes running around casting all my spells for me. And then I also have... Look, so normally I have like a 50% hit rate. Like I just make builds up, I don't plan them very well. And 50% of the time they go well, and 50% of the time they go badly. And so far, other than my league start, I haven't had a bad build yet. So in order to make sure that that happens, I'm going to try and build a tier 16 mapper on 1x. So that's my next build.
Okay.
Head to toe. Like gems, gear, 6-link, everything, 1x total.
It's going to be an absolution build.
Oh no, gross. I also have more constraints than that. It can't be any of the top 30 skills on Pee Wee Ninja.
Oh
So
no.
whatever those are. So I got to rule them out. And then if there's anything left that's like super obvious, like if I rule out the top 30 and like skeletal mages is still left there somehow, I can't do that either. So I'm going to have to pick something like really off meta and then only spend an X on it, and it'll be successful if it can clear tier 16 maps at a decent speed.
Sounds good.
So that's going to go poorly.
I don't think Toxic Rain is top 30 anymore.
That's one of those obvious ones that hasn't been figured out, though.
I was just looking through the list to see if there was anything. Absolution isn't even top 30. That's real strong too, isn't it? I haven't played it.
Yeah.
I've heard good things.
I haven't played it either, but I've heard
strong.
really good.
But yeah, nothing super obvious. So not Dominating Blow, not Toxic Rain, not Poison Concoction, not like, any of the like super obvious meta, like even if they're not meta in the way of people playing them, but like super established, this is really strong, rolled out. I had to go like proper something off meta on 1x.
Okay.
So we'll see.
So so it's like a challenge kind of thing. You don't just want to make a viable build guide for 1x for red maps, which probably a lot of people would already appreciate, even if it was like a meta build. You want the added challenge of doing something unintuitive.
Yep.
Gotcha. Right. Like I'm going to do the complete opposite. I played Righteous Fire a couple of times, and now, like I said, I'm rolling Cold Dot. Tabs lying around, and I really want to go with I just want to do a low life ES build with fast ES recharge, and then see how well that fares against the content. And I'll probably die to something silly in a map again, because I progress into high tiers and dangerous levels of juice way too fast, because it's fun. And then I'm already starting up my hype for the events that are going to come around the corner soon. I mean, it's going to be Badger's Private League, and undoubtedly we'll get an announcement of Zizran's Gauntlet soon. And I'm not really great at Gauntlet, and every Gauntlet I tell myself, next league is going to be the league where I don't play the actual league, but I directly start like after the first week or second week after the league start. I'll go and do Gauntlet practice and practice so hard that I'll actually significantly improve and get closer to securing one of the top ascendancy spots eventually. But it seems like it's not this league that's going to happen either. But I'll do my best. But I definitely, after pausing last Badgers Private League, I want to get back into that because it's always a load of fun. And it's great to connect with the community and to have like a sense of teamwork and a sense of, competition. And it's all in good sport. Good spirit, I mean. That's what I'm looking forward to. You guys are going to play in BPL? Raise your hands.
I might. I don't know if I'll have the time. There's some other stuff I need to line up as well.
I won't be. I'm not really interested in that kind of economy. I very much find it more fun when I can buy 1,000 of an item because I want to craft something for no good reason at all.
I'll give you that. It's a very different way of actually playing the game, but it's only a 4-day event, and the times that I've partaken in it always provided me with more joy than I expected. I was like, oh yeah, this might be fun. Oh, it was actually a lot of fun. And then next time I joined, last time it was a lot of fun. Maybe it's fun again. It was always more fun than I thought it was going to be.
Yep.
Back into
it. It's great that it exists. I'm really glad it does. I just don't really find it for me.
And that's great. PoE has so many different ways of being played. Playing PoE is all about finding out what you find most fun about the game and then just focusing on that.
Yep.
So
I might, for once though, actually try the gauntlet very casually. Because in the past, with my computer, there was just no way. And now, maybe. We'll see.
I'd be really hyped to see that. That's always cool when people who don't typically play a lot of hardcore or SSF go into this gauntlet, and then a lot of times they'll do a lot better than expected. Or they'd be like Gazi and play a build that's not necessarily the best choice and struggle with it a lot, and that's also fun to watch. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna try and make Animate Weapon work in Gauntlet. Animate Weapon is really cool, but
not
works
good.
well in Gauntlet. I mean, I haven't played it in a while. I actually would like to think that it's still pretty decent if you invest enough into it, but probably wrong about it. And also my idea of what a decent build is very, very far away from what the average player thinks a decent build is, I guess. The threshold is higher for the people in softcore who focus on a lot of damage. But yeah, I think we covered everything. You guys already gave yourself shoutouts for the content. I'm gonna shout out your channels in chat once again so that everyone can give you a follow if they haven't already. And this. And I want to thank you very much for joining the podcast. Wait, do I have a Tenkiei command? Because Tenkiei... Yeah, perfect. I knew. Because I can't do the shoutout command because that would just link to your Twitch. But all these links are obviously going to be in the description of the podcast on YouTube and in the description of the audio version of the podcast, which you can find 24 hours after this live broadcast, so tomorrow night. And so check that out if you've missed the beginning. And the next episode is actually still under construction. We haven't thrown together a planning for next weekend. So it's unclear whether there will be an episode. But if there is one, I will announce it as soon as possible. And if not, then you should be hyped for the weekend after that, when we will be joined by Tarkycat and Grimro for Saturday, the 19th of March. Then back in our original time slot, or traditional time slot of 11 a.m. GMT. And yeah, until then, I want to thank everyone for coming on. Thanks, Octavian, Tenkiei, Balor, for sharing your time and your insight. And thanks to the audience. Have a wonderful time playing Path of Exile. Until the next time, bye-bye.